Another month passed under the new blood donation system. The inner city donated first, since the people of the Dregs were too physically weak and would go last. The next month, the Extractors would donate. In the final month, the outer city, including the Dregs, would donate. Then the cycle repeated. Naturally, the inner city and the Extractors weren't happy about donating blood, but there was nothing they could do. The government was in full control, and the citizens could only comply. However, Cugelblitz was the angriest about all of this. They also used their Extractors' blood to feed the Crimson Fungus, but the new system forced them to pause their Extractors so they could donate, cutting into profits. The specialists mostly didn't care. Donating blood almost daily to the Crimson Fungus wasn't anything new to them. But the two heroes from Cugelblitz were not happy at all. They felt suppressed by the city, which was new to them. When the new system took effect, 4 experts from the city guards were stationed at the entrance to the Crimson Fungus containment unit. Cugelblitz hated that. Guards stationed inside their own building. This was their building. Given the risk of standing guard in front of the Crimson Fungus, the 4 experts were well compensated and promised guarantees for their survival and their families if Cugelblitz ever tried anything. 1 month later, when the Extractor's blood was collected and delivered, it paid off. Jornies tried to subtly intimidate the guards so he could stand near the Crimson Fungus while the first batch of blood was poured in. The experts were scared and let him in. But as soon as their shifts ended, one of them filed a report with the city about what had happened. Arya immediately ordered a protective order on the 4 guards and their families. She wouldn't let loyal guards suffer at Cugelblitz's hands. It was 30 liters, Arya told Nick. Apparently, there was a small mistake in the numbers for the collected blood, and these 30 liters wouldn't have been noticed without the reports from the experts. Without the guards, Jornies would have gotten away. Nick furrowed his brows. They want to test the boundaries. If they can get away with this bit of blood, they will become more and more daring. We can't allow them to do that, Nick said as he stood up from his chair. I'm going to deal with this. No, Arya said. Nick looked at Arya with furrowed brows. I'm going to deal with this, Arya added with narrowed eyes. Nick raised an eyebrow. I know that you are very powerful, Arya said. You even managed to overwhelm the Gate Guardian. However, I also know that you most likely can't directly fight someone like that. You probably have to use many things to your advantage. But as long as you are inside Cugelblitz, you don't have access to these advantages. Arya took a deep breath. I can't risk your death, and I think it's high time for me to do my job. I'm going to talk to Vanessa. I'm going to deal with this, Arya said with conviction. Nick remained silent for a couple of seconds as he weighed his options. Are you sure you can do this alone? Nick asked. Arya frowned. Nick, I'm several times your age and several times more powerful. Your worry is appreciated but not necessary. Well, Nick answered, Marcus was also as strong as you, and he couldn't contend with Cugelblitz. At that moment, the atmosphere became tense. Don't compare me to that coward, Arya spoke loudly, her annoyance apparent. I'm not like him. Have you already forgotten? We share a life now. I'm willing to risk my life for the city. Marcus was not. Nick was reminded of his blunder in this conversation with Arya, but he understood what she meant and nodded. Fine, I trust you. Then he sat back down. Arya smiled with confidence and a bit of arrogance. No worries. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again. You dealt with the upper layer, the middle layer, the criminals, the taxes, the dregs, and the smaller manufacturers. All of this was your doing, and I was just along for the ride. Arya narrowed her eyes and her tone darkened. Let Cugelblitz be my problem. I'm going to deal with them. Nick nodded. Okay, I'll leave it up to you. Arya nodded back and left the office. After she left, Nick sighed. I'm not used to getting this much help. I usually have to do everything myself if I want it to work out. As he thought about Arya, Nick felt much calmer. If he were to fall, there would be somebody there to catch him. He didn't have to shoulder all the responsibility by himself any longer. A powerful person was there to support him. I should trust her and give her the same support she's been giving me. After realizing he had support, Nick's chest began to feel heavy and tense. It was like his body finally dared to relax after years of stress, and all the accumulated damage came to the front. Humans, even extractors, were not built to deal with this much stress for an entire lifetime. They could live on their own, but they needed support during the darkest times. I don't have time for this right now, Nick thought as he suppressed the negative feelings back into their cages. I have to be strong. If I'm not strong, the city won't improve any longer. So Nick went back to work. Meanwhile, Arya made her way to Kugelblitz. As soon as she reached the entrance, she saw a couple of normal citizens guarding it. Naturally, the city no longer guarded Kugelblitz's entrance, and since Kugelblitz had gotten rid of every extractor weaker than a specialist, they were now stuck with normal people for guards. Technically, they didn't need to guard the building. No sane person would break into this place. The guards were more for appearance. When the guards saw the governor, they became nervous. "Greetings, Governor. How can we help you?" the leader of the guards asked. "I need to talk to the CEO. It's urgent," Arya spoke evenly. "Of course," the leader said. "I'm going to contact her right away. Please wait here." Arya did just that, and the leader ran inside to contact the CEO. A couple of minutes later, he came back out. "Miss Corinth is ready to see you in her office. Please follow me." "Thank you," Arya said. They walked into the building, and the leader led her to the highest floor, then stopped beside the door and gestured for her to enter. "I'm going to wait here," he said politely. Naturally, if Arya decided to cause some chaos, this man would be helpless to stop her. But that wasn't the point. The point was to demonstrate that Arya was an outsider, that she couldn't simply walk into Kugelblitz. Arya opened the door and stepped inside, closing it behind her. "Greetings, Governor," Vanessa spoke with a distant, cold tone. "In the future, I would prefer if you could knock." Vanessa seemed confident and apathetic, as though she were talking to a stranger. Arya didn't answer, only looked at her. The next moment, rage appeared in Arya's chest. Kugelblitz. Under Nick's rule, the lives of the people in the city were improving. He was dealing with crime. He was dealing with the poor. He dealt with the upper layer. He dealt with the false news. The city was improving. It was growing. And most importantly, its affluence no longer relied on the misery of its weakest citizens. Now, everyone had an opportunity to grow. The Dregs were no longer preoccupied with having to scrape together this ridiculous sum of money every month. They finally had time to work through their issues and look for better opportunities. They were no longer stuck in an endless cycle of misery. They got a chance to improve their lives. But Kugelblitz, this greedy fucking company, Kugelblitz tried to stop the city from improving just so they could have another bar of gold on their golden mountain. Arya was done. She was fucking done. Chapter 525, Angry Arya. "Vanessa," Arya said with a dark voice. "I don't feel comfortable using first names any." "I'm not up for your games, Vanessa," Arya said with a seething voice as she narrowed her eyes. Vanessa could feel the rage coming from Arya, and that was definitely not a common thing. Arya was always approachable and had herself under control. Vanessa wasn't sure she had ever seen her this angry. Vanessa also narrowed her eyes. "This is not a game. Our relationship is different." Bang! Arya waved her hand, and the furniture of the entire office was thrown against the wall. "I'm done with you," Arya said in a dark, threatening voice as she approached. Vanessa jumped to her feet, ready to fight, though she was very nervous deep inside. She had always looked up to Arya as a person and a boss. Seeing her this angry intimidated her quite a bit. "We want to make this city better. Do you not understand that?" Arya shouted as she stepped closer. "Nick wants to improve this city. Nick wants to make this city better for Aegis. Kugelblitz is not the leader of the city. Nick is. He might not have the physical power, but he has the intelligence and dedication. As a mere initial expert, he is willing to put his life on the line against several heroes." At that moment, Vanessa summoned her sniper rifle and pointed it at Arya. Arya stopped advancing, but her rage only increased. "If you dare to take a shot, I will kill you right this instant," she spoke in the darkest, most threatening tone imaginable. Even though Vanessa was intimidated, her arms were steady as she looked at Arya through her scope. "Don't come any closer," Vanessa ordered. Arya looked at her with narrowed eyes. "If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't slowly walk up to you like this. I'm here to issue a warning. Jornies has taken 30 liters of blood that didn't belong to Kugelblitz and used it to work with the Crimson Fungus. This is a break in our agreement, and I have all the authority to issue a hefty fine on Kugelblitz for that. Instead, I am here to tell you the facts." Arya took another step closer. Now Vanessa's arms started to shake. She wanted to pull the trigger. Arya wouldn't be able to evade a shot from this distance. They could get rid of her right now, but Vanessa knew this would have dire consequences. Aegis would investigate, and they wouldn't be able to keep it a secret. Aegis would most likely take them into custody and force them into servitude for decades. Killing Arya was akin to killing herself. "If you take another step, I will shoot. I am only defending myself," Vanessa shouted. Arya looked deeply into her eyes, then took another step forward. Vanessa's arms shook more. "Why are you doing this?" she shouted in a mix of panic, rage, helplessness, frustration, and betrayal. "You don't have to do this." Arya was reminded of when she had said these same words to Nick. "Because I have no other choice," Arya said darkly. "You left me no other choice. Nothing will stop Crimson City's rise. Not you, not the Specters, not Blitz. I finally have a worthy goal in my life, and I will not let it slip out of my grasp because of fear." Arya took another step forward. Vanessa's arms shook harder as she looked at Arya, now only 2 meters away, well within her attack range. Vanessa's mind raced with images of how a battle would play out. She was under immense stress, as if she were in a life-and-death fight. "If you pull the trigger, I will destroy Blitz," Arya said with a dark tone. "I will kill you. I will kill Jornies. I will force all of your specialists to work for the city. We will take your Specters, and the city will be more powerful than ever before. Destroying Blitz is the best thing that can happen to the city. Your blood taxes and your shady deals damage Crimson City more than anything else." Arya took another step forward. "Do you want this to happen?" she asked, stepping closer still, until she stood directly in front of the barrel of the sniper rifle. Vanessa's body was covered in sweat, her fingers shaking. "I will repeat," Arya spoke slowly. "Blitz is not the ruler of the city. Nick is. You will comply with the law. If you break it, I will come for you. I worked for Blitz for over a century and I don't want it destroyed. But if I have to, I will do so without hesitation. The blood donation system is the last change we need to fulfill the goal. The goal is to increase our tribute to Aegis by 20%, and with the blood donation system, we managed to do just that. We achieved our goal. The only thing that stands in our way is your unwillingness to cooperate." Arya looked deeply into Vanessa's eyes. She was unafraid, a powerful sniper rifle pointed right at her chest, and still unafraid. Why? Because she was fighting for something more important than her life. This was what Nick had taught her: conviction, dedication, doing one's best to achieve one's dream. How could one expect to achieve a dream without going all in? Meanwhile, Vanessa was a nervous, panicked wreck. Her mind raced. Standing in front of Arya, she felt like a normal citizen standing before a Specter. She felt helpless, like even if she pulled the trigger, she would die. Her instincts told her she couldn't possibly win against Arya. The sheer confidence Arya exuded intimidated her more than anything. It sounded cheesy, but the following was still true. People and animals only showed their true power when protecting something more important than their own lives. A bear defending its cubs became far more threatening than one fighting only for itself. The reason was conviction, confidence. And right now, Arya was putting her life on the line for Crimson City and Nick. Protecting these things mattered more to her than surviving. "Stop with your stupid games," Arya said after several seconds of silence. "This is no longer the old Crimson City. With the new blood donation system, we no longer need to go after Blitz." Her body relaxed, her expression turning more cold and distant than threatening. "Your profits will no longer be negatively affected," Arya said evenly. "The way things are now is how they will stay. Accept your new reality." Arya turned and walked toward the door. Vanessa still aimed her rifle at her. Arya turned around one last time and looked at her with a deep gaze. "I don't want any more incidents where blood mysteriously goes missing. And if anything happens to Nick, I swear upon my life and everything important to me, I will kill you. Don't test me." Then Arya calmly opened the door and walked out. The door closed, but Vanessa still aimed at it with her rifle. Her arms shook even more. Finally, she took a deep breath, let go of her gun, and weakly fell to her knees, her entire body shivering in stress and anxiety. She felt like she had just battled for her life. Vanessa didn't recover for several minutes, the scene replaying in her mind over and over. Meanwhile, the guard led Arya away. The office was soundproofed, so he hadn't heard any of the clamor. Arya was led out of the building and quickly returned to the city's headquarters. As she walked back, she had a spring in her step. She felt great. She finally did something. She stood up for what she truly believed in. This was a great feeling. Nick was bound to be proud of her, right? At that moment, she stopped walking. "Why did I think that?" she thought. "Is it important to me that Nick's proud of me?" She imagined talking to Nick and telling him what happened. She didn't want to admit it, but it would feel nice if Nick approved of her actions. Arya scratched the side of her head. "Are we friends? Pretty sure." She remained silent for a while, looking at the ground. "Is that all I want to be?" In the end, she walked into headquarters and into Nick's office, feeling more nervous than she had approaching Vanessa's sniper rifle. Nick casually looked at her. "How did it go?" he asked. Arya broke out in a wide smile. I dealt with it. Blitz will no longer be an issue, she said with pride. Nick released a sigh of relief. Good job. I'm glad that I trusted you, he said with a slight smile. Arya's smile brightened. No problem, she shouted. Chapter 526, Success. Weeks passed and Blitz didn't try anything shady. In fact, it seemed like they had given up. Arya said that she dealt with it, but I'm still not certain, Nick thought. Would Blitz give up this easily? Blitz was a bit too quiet for Nick's liking. He had expected some kind of conflict, but there was nothing. A couple more months passed, and the blood donation system worked without any major problems. Sure, there was the occasional guy who tried to sneak out of paying, but those were quickly dealt with. The city was producing a lot of Zephyx. Even though it earned much less in taxes, the Specters the city owned and Ghosty's research easily made up for that. Then came all the shares the city now owned from advancing, middle-layer businessmen. Lastly, thanks to the blood donation system, the city now earned more than enough to increase the tribute paid to Aegis. In total, the city earned about 35% more than before Nick took over. The goal had been to pay 20% more after 5 years. Instead, Nick managed to increase it by 35% within 2. Naturally, Nick wasn't willing to increase the tribute by that much. He'd be fine with a 20% increase for now. The remaining extra money would be invested back into the city. Nick wanted to make Crimson City bigger. All the changes Nick had implemented had the side effect of improving birth rates. Children no longer needed to pay the blood tax. There were more orphanages, and more children survived to adulthood. More people in the Dregs managed to advance in their careers, giving them enough money to consider starting a family. However, as fewer people died and more were born, the price of housing increased. In the past, everyone could basically grab any random house. There had been far more houses than people. Now it was a bit more difficult. Not a problem yet, but it could become one. Nick decided to spend the extra money expanding the city west. To the west were the carbon fields that supplied carbon for the city's steel, and Nick wanted to bring them inside the walls. However, this also meant the city would directly border the land of desires, home to an elder no one had suppressed yet, not because it was difficult, but because the city had strictly prohibited experimentation on the Specter. The land of desires served as a defensive measure for the carbon fields. With it covering one side, all the black slimes ran into the land of desires instead. We can capture or kill the land of desires once we have a new wall, Nick thought. Nick and Arya ordered the expansion, and within a couple of months, the carbon fields had been fully engulfed by the city. The walls expanded to include a 2x3 kilometer area to the west of the old city, giving 2 square kilometers of additional building space and 4 square kilometers of fields that could now be tended by normal people. This opened up quite a few new jobs, since the plants grew quickly and had to be harvested almost weekly. As soon as the new wall was secure, Arya rescinded the protective order on the land of desires. Immediately, every manufacturer raced to suppress it except Blitz, who was only interested in fanatics and stronger. Within a single day, one of the newer manufacturers, the one with 15 experts, managed to suppress and capture the land of desires. By the next day, everyone knew how powerful it was. Late Elder. A late Elder Force Specter, almost as valuable as Gemini's main Specter, the Distortion. It was also the most valuable Specter the new manufacturer owned, and they decided to rebrand, Desire. With 15 experts and 6 elders, Desire now produced a bit more Zephyx than Gemini and Skydream. Gemini and Skydream had 6 experts each but also over 30 veterans. They too had 6 elders, but with only 6 experts they couldn't work all of them. Because of that, Desire earned more money with the same number of elders. By income, Desire was now the second biggest manufacturer, the city itself excluded. The land of desires vanished from the west of the city, and the guards on that stretch of wall no longer had to constantly resist the urge to consume all the tantalizing things within it. And like that, the third yearly meeting arrived since Nick had become Crimson City's liaison. The manufacturers braced for another heavy hit, but nothing much happened. There were a couple of small changes, one of which the manufacturers actually liked. The city now offered help searching for Specters. Any manufacturer could pay the city to rent volunteer guards for the search, and the cost could partially be deducted from their taxes. The reason for the change was that the city had way too many guards, over 100 newbies, 200 Johns, and 60 veterans. Around 3% of the entire population worked as guards, a crazy high amount. So Nick decided to give them something to do. The city would earn even more money. The volunteering guards would earn a bonus while gaining experience, and the number of captured Specters would increase, a good thing for everyone. More Specters meant more Extractors, meant more money, meant more space, meant more people, meant more money, and so on. During the meeting, Blitz was surprisingly silent. They didn't even say anything that could be viewed as uncooperative. Did they really stop resisting? Nick thought. An entire year had passed since Nick announced the blood donation system. Except for that one incident near the beginning, nothing had happened since. If Blitz wanted to kill Nick, they could have tried any time within the past year. Nick wasn't keeping himself hidden. He regularly left headquarters on his own. He'd been braced for an assassination attempt for a year now, but it never came. What did Arya do to them? Nick thought. The meeting passed without incident, and Nick went back to his office. One more month passed, and it was finally time to pay the yearly tribute. Huge crates were transported from the inner city to the outer city, and people watched with interest as powerful guards carried them. By the end, 24 crates were stacked on top of each other. Arya and Nick arrived and stood in front of the crates, then waited. About half an hour later, 3 people flew in from outside and landed before them. "Governor," the man leading them said with a nod, before turning to Nick. "Liaison." "Agent," Nick and Arya greeted back. The leading agent looked at the crates. "Why are there 24?" he asked. "Because I have done my job as liaison," Nick said. "My job is to increase the productivity of the city without increasing the misery. I had 5 years as a deadline, but I managed to finish it in a bit more than 2. From now on, Crimson City's tribute will be 20% higher. Instead of 20 tons of Zephyx, we deliver 24 tons. The agent furrowed his brows, looked at the crates, then gestured for one of his people to step forward. She retrieved a device, inserted it into a hole in one of the crates, and repeated the process for all 24, finally nodding in confirmation to her leader. The leader nodded, impressed. "Seems like the project was a success. Good job, liaison." "Thank you, agent," Nick said politely. "We are going to report back to our judge, who will send a report to the headquarters. As far as I am aware, even though you managed to achieve your goal early, the deadline of 5 years still exists. Use the remaining 3 years to improve the city even more. The better the city is, the better your impression will be." "Thank you," Nick said politely. The agents put the crates away and left the city after a few more words. Nick and Arya watched them go. They had done it. They had fulfilled their mission. The Dregs were becoming cleaner and richer as more days passed. Deaths were down. Birth rates were up. Corruption was at an all-time low. The city was growing. The upper layer didn't dare try anything shady. Blitz was surprisingly cooperative. They had done it. They had succeeded. They had transformed Crimson City. Chapter 527, Friends, huh? "So what will you do now?" Arya asked after the two of them returned to his office. "I'm not entirely sure," he answered absent-mindedly. Nick had barely registered Arya's question. His mind was drifting. He still remembered the time Horua had died and how he had nearly killed himself. Back then, the parasite had told him he should help 1,000 people to make up for causing her death. That was when Nick's goal was formed. Before then, he'd had vague ideas about helping the poor, but he hadn't truly gone all in until that moment. Help 1,000 people, Nick thought. A moment later, he thought about the Dregs. They were shrinking day by day, not because people were moving out, but because more and more of them had enough money to live a normal life. The shops and stalls became more luxurious, and the food they sold improved in quality. More people bought that food, which pushed the shops to improve their image even further. People finally had access to real clothing and didn't need to walk around in iron wool anymore. There were still criminals, but far fewer than before. Some people would never get out of the Dregs, but that was more a personal issue now. The opportunities were there. As the city kept expanding, more jobs popped up, until there were more jobs available than unemployed people. Some companies even offered to help new hires get a real education just to secure employees. The pay was surprisingly high too, and the reason was Blitz. They now had to offer so much money for blood that many people could survive by donating alone. Of course, with more money circulating in the outer city, prices rose too, which put more pressure on people to donate. For a while, donating blood was the only relevant factor in survival, so nobody was interested in a job. Until the companies, flush with funds from the higher prices, desperately needed more employees, and salaries had to outclass blood donation money to attract anyone. Jobs became more and more lucrative, and lives improved as a result. Now, a job was necessary for a comfortable life, but blood donation alone was enough to survive. Nobody needed to fight for their life in the Dregs anymore, and as long as the city kept expanding, even more people would be needed to fill the space. Ironically, even though the minimum tax the Dregs paid had been lowered, the city now collected several times more from them, since most people were far above the minimum income threshold. Nick had done it. Essentially, the Dregs were no more. Everyone living there had their life improved drastically. The dream he'd aimed for almost 2 decades ago was fulfilled. And yet, Nick absent-mindedly looked at the wall. This guilt is still there, he thought. I know that I am only partially responsible for Horyua's death. Winter told me as much, and I drastically improved the lives of over 2,000 people. Nick sighed. So why do I still feel like shit? Why is this guilt still eating me up? His mind wandered to the Crimson Sea incident. I guess that's the reason. Improving 2,000 lives isn't enough to rectify the deaths of 1,000 innocent people. I just need to do the same thing for several cities, and things will improve. As long as I keep improving the lives of normal people, things will get better. At that moment, Nick's heart rate sped up and he became nervous. For some reason, he had difficulty believing his own thoughts. But that had to be it, right? What other way was there to deal with all this guilt? This had to work. Otherwise, what was the alternative living forever with this guilt? I might as well end my life right now if that's my fate, Nick thought. Are you all right? Nick's eyes snapped to Arya. He had completely forgotten she was in his office. Yeah, everything's all right. What was your question? He asked. Arya raised an eyebrow. What's bothering you? She asked with empathy. Nick furrowed his brows. I told you everything's all right. Nick, I can see that you're worried, Arya said. Is it that difficult for you to tell me? Aren't we friends? Nick's mind was catapulted back to his last real conversation with Winter. Friends? Winter had been the only person Nick had ever considered a friend, and even that had proven false. He'd invested money into his own employee, and even killed Horyua while letting Nick wallow in misery. That wasn't a friend. A friend was someone Nick could trust, someone without an ulterior motive. Nick looked at Arya with annoyance, but didn't say anything. Friends? Arya had helped Nick many times without asking for anything in return. She'd been willing to risk her life for his dream. Whatever she'd done to help him, it never felt like an attempt to influence him. She felt completely genuine, and she hadn't done anything unforgivable to him. She was just nice. Nick's gaze relaxed. A friend, huh? He repeated. Are we not friends? Arya asked, raising a brow. Nick remained silent for a while, looking at the wall. It's difficult to come to terms with. I'm not sure if I ever had a true friend in my life. I'm not sure what a friend really is, Nick said. Arya felt bad for him. Not having a friend sounded horrible. We achieved our goal today, she said. Why don't we take off for the day, celebrate, and talk a little? The thought of not working made Nick nervous. Dark thoughts crept in whenever he stopped. But he also felt tired, ironic since experts didn't need sleep. Sure, Nick said. Arya smiled and led him to a break room inside headquarters. A couple of people were already there, but seeing Nick and Arya, they quickly excused themselves and left. Nick was still stuck in his thoughts when a cup of coffee appeared on the table in front of him. No thanks, Nick said. I remember you and Vernon talking about coffee all the time, Arya said. I thought you liked it. Nick sighed. That's not it. Then what's the issue? Arya asked, sitting beside him. Nick sighed again. I hate the upper layer for all their luxuries while the people in the Dregs suffer. Every cup of coffee costs 1,000 credits, enough to pay the blood tax of several people. I can't hate the upper layer and indulge in the same things at the same time. Arya looked at him with skepticism. I can see where you're coming from, but you're stuck in the past. Coffee's down to 500 credits a cup, and people from the former Dregs can afford one a month without starving. Sure, most would call it a waste, but if they truly wanted one, they could get it. She pushed the cup closer. And you made all of that possible. You tamed the upper layer and implemented every one of these reforms. The people of the outer city love you. I don't think anyone there would begrudge you a cup of coffee. Nick looked at the mug. Her words made logical sense, but his emotions didn't agree. He felt like he didn't deserve it, didn't deserve any pleasure in life. Still, when it came down to it, Nick trusted his head more than his heart. Do we have milk and sugar? He asked. Arya's brows rose in surprise. Yeah, sure, she said, opening a fancy fridge for some milk. Nick dumped a ton of milk and sugar into his coffee before drinking it. Arya could have sworn Nick drank his coffee black. Seeing the serious, stoic liaison make himself a milkshake with a hint of coffee took her aback. Chapter 528, Sharing His Story. Nick slowly drank his coffee. It was strange, it tasted good, but he didn't want to drink it. It felt bad too. After a couple of slow gulps, he decided to get it over with and swallowed the rest in one go. That made him feel much better. "Mind if I ask you a question?" Arya asked. Nick raised an eyebrow. Usually Arya just asked without permission. The fact that she was asking now meant he probably wouldn't like the question. "Sure," he answered evenly. "How was life in the Dregs?" Nick calmed down. "Pretty bad," he answered. "Could you give me an example?" He gave several curt answers, but Arya kept asking, and it took a while to coax him out of his shell. Eventually he just started narrating his life from the Dregs onward. Arya listened, and the more she heard, the worse she felt for him. He had been just a child. He told her about the less savory things too. The time he'd accidentally killed a woman who stole his money. The time he took money from one gang to assassinate someone from another. The time he robbed one of the bigger stores in the Dregs. The time he brought back a runaway child, who seemed to become petrified in fear as soon as she saw him deliver her to her father. A man so unstable that everyone avoided him, which was how the job had ended up with Nick in the first place. Nick had killed 4 people total during his time in the Dregs, but returning that child to her father weighed on his conscience the most. Eventually he talked about meeting Albert for the first time, though, naturally, he didn't tell Arya about his ability. Whenever the topic came up, he said he couldn't go into detail. All Arya knew was that it gave him tremendous power under very specific circumstances, and that it was unusual enough to interest an expert. Then Nick moved on to Winter. Arya had only asked about the Dregs, but she was interested in every part of his life. When she heard about catching the Dreamer, she was impressed. He'd shown tremendous willpower and resilience. Nick's mood had been decent up to this point. Then his narration slowed and he grew somber. "Horua." In the end, Nick told her about Horua. Arya could see where it was going from the start. There was a reason no manufacturer considered anyone under 14 for new extractors, and even 14-year-olds almost never made it through selection. Nick had thrown an 11-year-old in front of a Specter. The only reason he'd managed to work with Specters at that age was because he'd been through so much, literally and figuratively. An 11-year-old couldn't otherwise handle it. In Arya's mind, though, Winter held the greater share of the blame. Nick had been uneducated. Winter had received the best education in the city and had studied how to run a manufacturer specifically. There was no way he hadn't foreseen what would happen, and instead of telling Nick, he let it happen. Eventually, Arya didn't even need to ask anymore. Nick simply kept narrating. There was no reason to keep the illegal thing secret. It had all happened so long ago, and Arya had probably done worse. "Artem Melfian," Arya repeated as Nick talked about Dark Dream's conflict with Cycle. "I think he works for us now." "He does?" Nick asked. Arya nodded. "I saw his file a couple of weeks ago. He's still a John. I think he doesn't have the willpower to go through with Zephyx." Nick thought back to Artem. He'd always wished to take revenge for his horrible behavior, but it had happened so long ago that in the end, he just didn't care enough to do anything. At most, he'd ask for a corruption check. Artem had been young back then too. Maybe he'd changed for the better. Eventually, Nick talked about Vernon. "Were you the one that killed him?" Arya asked. Nick saw no point in hiding it and nodded. Arya wasn't surprised. "Why?" she asked. Nick wanted to say he'd only done it to protect himself, since Vernon knew about his ability. But he realized that would be lying to himself. That wasn't the real reason. "I hated him," Nick said. "He constantly asked Marcus to raise the blood tax. When Winter died, he cared more about Dark Dream's shares than finding the killer. He raised a monster like Artem. He constantly acted like a nice guy and then stabbed you in the back with a smile. I hate him." Arya laughed a little, surprising him. "I can see where you're coming from. The only one of his kids who got anywhere was Samar, and she always treated her father curtly and coldly. They worked together on the surface, but the animosity wasn't hard to see. It was nice working with Vernon. He was reliable, but I always knew I never wanted our relationship to go past colleagues." They kept talking until Nick reached the point where he'd been ambushed in his own home. He hesitated, looking at Arya. Somehow he felt at ease, like he could tell her, but he was also nervous, afraid of losing his only friend. In the end, he sighed and told her. About the Spartans. And about the Crimson Sea. Arya had to take a couple of deep breaths. That was something. She could see how terrible he felt talking about it. "And you're blaming yourself for that?" she asked. "I was the one who freed it," Nick said. "You freed an adolescent, Nick," Arya said. As soon as it broke out, several experts, specialists, and even Marcus gathered in front of the building. No one could have predicted how things would turn out. Nobody knew it could absorb Specters. Nobody knew there was a hole in the ground. Nobody knew it would develop a fog ability that could kill thousands. Sure, none of it would have happened without your actions, but you weren't the only one who failed. So many people failed that day, and they all share the blame. Imagine an angry child who throws her father's bottle of alcohol against the wall, and the bottle hits it in just such a way that the entire house collapses, killing her whole family. Would you say the child should be executed for murder? Arya asked. Nick could see where she was coming from, but it didn't change his feelings. Without his actions, all those people would still be alive. Why would they care whether he'd wanted to kill them or not? In the end, he was the reason for their deaths. Yet he still felt glad Arya didn't hate him. Eventually, Nick talked about Julian and everything beyond. By this point, they'd been talking for hours, and Arya had been genuinely interested in his life. She understood him much better now. His actions made more sense. But she could also see how wrong they were. Nick was essentially killing himself with his fanaticism to reach his goal. Arya had lived a long time, and she knew that even if Nick managed to save millions of people, his guilt wouldn't shrink by one bit. It might even grow. He was on a path to self-destruction. But she also knew she couldn't just say so outright. His mindset had formed over decades. Changing it would take a long time and many small conversations. She wanted to help him. He had done so much good for Crimson City. Although that's not the real reason, Arya thought with a self-deprecating laugh. She looked at Nick and he looked back. Might as well jump into the cold water, she thought. Nick, Arya said. Yes. What do you think about romance? Chapter 529, Hands. Nick was confused. That question had come out of nowhere. Why do you ask? He said, genuinely confused. Well, Arya said, twiddling with her fingers, I was interested. Nick watched her and could tell she was a bit nervous. No way, right? He asked himself. She knows all the horrible things I've done. She knows about all the people I've killed. It can't be that she's actually interested in someone like me. He took a deep breath. Don't take this the wrong way. I might be mistaken. But is there a possibility that you're interested in me? Sorry if that's completely wrong, he said carefully. Arya looked at him with surprise and amusement. Not sure if I can make it any more obvious, she thought with a laugh. Yes, Nick, she said. I'm interested in pursuing a relationship with you. Nick blinked in complete shock. But you're so amazing, he couldn't help saying. You're powerful, experienced, beautiful, strong. You're probably the most radiant woman in the entire city. Why would you choose someone like me? Arya sighed. You really can't see yourself for who you are, can you? You're the most powerful extractor for your level in probably the entire world. You're willing to risk your life for people with no relation to you. You have the courage to stand up to people who could kill you with a flick of their finger. You can outmaneuver the shrewdest business people of the upper layer. In just 2 years, you tamed all of Crimson City and made it an amazing place to live. She smirked playfully. Also, you're quite tall and muscular. That last part was clearly a joke. Appearances barely mattered next to Nick's actual qualities. Arya, you know why I do these things, Nick said carefully. I'm just trying to redeem myself for what I've done in the past. In a way, I'm following a selfish goal. Does that matter? Arya asked. Someone who donates 10,000 credits to the homeless every year for a tax return has done more good than someone who volunteers a couple of hours a month to feed them. One does it for a selfish reason, the other for a selfless one. If you were homeless, would you rather get 1 meal from one man or 100 credits? Nick could see where she was coming from. Actions and intentions, a highly debated topic in human society. When the two conflicted, opinions split fast. Someone who did a lot of good for selfish reasons versus someone who did a little good for selfless ones. Who was the better person? Opinions varied. I know what you mean, but it doesn't change my personality, Nick said. I'm selfishly going after this goal to redeem myself. If I weren't plagued by guilt, I might not even help the people of the Dregs. Nick, you're searching for purity in actions without considering feelings. That's impossible. Feelings are the very things that make us act. Let me give you some examples. If I didn't selfishly want my daughter in my life, I wouldn't have saved her. If I didn't feel good helping others, I wouldn't help them. If I didn't love someone, I wouldn't do anything for them. The fact that you feel guilty shows you're not a bad person. If you were, you wouldn't feel guilty, right? Arya asked. Nick furrowed his brows. Her logic was sound but hard to accept. In the end, he shook his head. I still don't get it. Why are you interested in me? Are you fishing for compliments? Arya asked, raising a brow. What? No, I'm just genuinely confused, Nick quickly answered. I gave you several reasons, she said. Do you want me to repeat them? No, that's not necessary, Nick said. thinking back over what she'd named. The way she'd described him made it feel like she wasn't talking about him at all, yet she hadn't lied, everything she said was technically true. I don't know, Nick said with a sigh. In 3 years I'll most likely leave the city again, and I don't know when I can return. So, Arya asked, it's not like you'll be gone forever. I'm sure you could visit a couple of times a year, and I might get the chance to become an agent myself in a few years, which would give me a lot more leeway to travel. If you can't leave your new city, I'll just visit you. Nick seemed to grow more nervous. Nick, Arya said with a frown, this isn't easy for me either. You're keeping me in limbo. It would be nice to get a definite answer. Oh, sorry, he said, looking away. Arya just kept looking at him. He'd always seemed filled with conviction and power, but right now he seemed so insecure and uncertain. After a while he sighed again. I'm not experienced with these kinds of feelings. I'm not sure how to process them. I feel like I don't deserve to be with someone as wonderful as you. I've done so many horrible things, there shouldn't be anyone in this world who'd want to be my friend. Yet you know all about it, and you still say you want to be with me. It's difficult to wrap my mind around. He sighed again, looking at her. I feel like you're a strong fire. I want to feel your warmth, but I'm afraid I'll burn into nothing if I get too close. Nick felt his chest shaking under the stress. Guilt, self-loathing, hatred, anger, all of it bubbled to the surface, and he did his best to keep it in check. Feeling these things was bad. Whenever he did, his motivation vanished and he couldn't work toward his goal. He'd just sit in a room all day and stare at the wall. He didn't want to go back to that. Suddenly something touched his hand and he pulled it back. Arya looked at him and slowly moved her hand closer again. As it touched his shoulder, Nick felt his body shiver. It felt bad. It felt dangerous. Arya noticed and pulled her hand back. So, I guess that's a no then, she said. That made Nick even more afraid. No, 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 he quickly said. It's not a no. The thought of hurting her feelings hurt him. He said, trailing off. I don't know, sorry, I just don't know what's going on anymore. I'm not even sure if this is real, he said, defeated. Let me ask you again, Arya said slowly. And this time I want a concrete answer. Yes or no, do you want to be with me? Nick looked at her. It was so difficult to answer. He felt like he shouldn't, but he really wanted to. He wanted to feel something other than crushing guilt and self-loathing. He wanted some color in his life, but he didn't deserve any. But he wanted it. But he didn't deserve it, but he wanted it. Nick gritted his teeth. I'm sorry, he said. Arya's face fell slightly. But I really, really want to be with you, he said. Arya looked at him with surprise. That was a yes, right? Meanwhile, Nick felt like he'd lost all his conviction, like he'd failed his goal by giving in to pleasure. I'm such a selfish person, he thought. He felt something touch his hand again, but this time Arya's hand clamped down and held it. You gave consent, she said carefully. Nick became nervous. He wasn't familiar with any of this. A yes, he said. Arya smiled, sat down beside him, and just held his hand. Then how about we just sit like this for a while, she asked. Nick's nervousness lessened but didn't fully vanish. Sure, he answered. He tried to avoid looking at her, though she kept staring at him with a smile. Is this so bad? Arya asked after a minute of silence. Nick looked back at her. No. The two of them continued sitting together. Chapter 530, Not as Envisioned. The next couple of days were like a dream for Nick. The two of them still had to rule the city, but with the biggest changes already in effect, their workload was several times lighter than usual, giving them time to spend with each other. Nick felt like nothing was real anymore. He had believed his life would be filled with nothing but self-loathing and monotonous dedication to his goal. Instead, he was spending a good part of his day just talking to Arya. Often, the conversation drifted to Nick's dedication to a better world. Arya still agreed with the philosophy. She hadn't been a fan of it at first, but years of working with Nick had changed her, and she now felt she could make a real difference in the world. Still, she believed Nick was pursuing his goal in a very unhealthy way, almost like he wouldn't be happy until he died for his cause. It was admirable to risk one's life for a dream, but actively courting death and martyrdom was not a good thing. A living person could keep doing good, while a dead one couldn't. Nick could see where she was coming from, but this wasn't easily solved. When it came to problems like this, logic and emotion were often in opposition. Logic said one thing, emotion said the other. Most of the time logic ruled Nick's mind, but in his weaker moments, emotion could take over, and at that point, logic itself could warp. Illogical things could start to feel logical. A small group of friends in the outer city. One of them constantly nagged the others to be careful where they were walking, even though they already were. If it happened at the worst moment, the others might grow annoyed for a couple of minutes. Now, if that same friend walked toward a hole leading to the Crimson Sea without noticing, and the others, still irritated, thought, well, they're always telling us to watch our step, why should we warn them now? Some people really would think that was justified in the moment. But the instant the friend actually fell in, the rage would vanish, replaced by horror. One of their friends had died and it was their fault. They could have stopped it. Why didn't they? Was it worth it, letting a friend die just to feel righteous for a moment? In a vacuum, maybe the friend's fall was deserved by their own hypocrisy. But real life wasn't a vacuum. There was a before and an after, a history of the friend helping them, and a lifetime of guilt and regret that followed. Was the validation of being right worth losing a lifelong friend over? Many people could fall into this mindset, and the ones most susceptible were those who believed they had perfect control over their emotions. Nick was one of them. When emotion alone dictated someone's actions, they could become a danger to others. When logic alone dictated them, they could become a danger to themselves, not physically, but mentally. The angrier Nick felt, the colder and more calculating he became. After talking with him for so long, Arya had learned all of this, and she wanted him to understand it, to understand what a healthy life actually meant. But Nick didn't fully agree. His cold, calculating nature was what had made Crimson City so much better. If he'd let empathy reign, he wouldn't have killed so many people from the upper layer, and they'd still be causing trouble. If he hadn't bet his own life, Blitz would still be trying to control the city. It wasn't easy for Arya to argue against that. She believed there had to be a different way, but she couldn't think of one. Without what Nick had done, Crimson City wouldn't be where it was. "But is that truly worth killing yourself over?" she asked. "I already told you. I'm not going to repeat myself," Nick answered with annoyance. Arya sighed. It wasn't easy being in a relationship with him. They'd gotten closer, but that was exactly why it was hard as a stranger. Watching a powerful leader risk his life to improve the world was admirable. As his partner, it was just terrifying. The very thing that had once been attractive was now a hurdle. But what was she supposed to do? Nick had made it clear from the start that his goal wouldn't change. She'd known he wouldn't stop. He would keep risking his life for his dream, with or without her. She could feel it even now. Even after all this talking, there was still a distance between them, like she couldn't quite feel his emotions, like he wasn't letting anyone come close. It wasn't easy. Should I even try to get closer? Arya thought. If I do, he might start to regret things and stop pursuing his dream. I'm not sure he'd ever recover from that. She could see that Nick's mental state was deeply unhealthy, and also that this same unhealthy state was exactly what let him make the crazy decisions that had benefited Crimson City so much. His mad conviction, his willingness to bet his own life, was a powerful tool of intimidation. If he hadn't seemed so insanely convinced of his goal, plenty of people would still be trying to game the system. In a twisted way, giving Nick a healthier mindset might get him killed. His lack of madness could invite the assassination attempt that finally succeeded. After a lot of thinking, Arya reached a conclusion. What was the core issue? Why did Nick have to act this crazy to get anything done? The answer was simple: power. Personal power. Nick wasn't strong enough yet. If he were a hero, he wouldn't need to act so recklessly. He could calmly set the rules and no one would dare refuse. What hero would risk assassinating someone that powerful without an advantage of several levels? Arya's decision was simple. She wouldn't try to change him, not for now. His madness was necessary to keep him alive and moving toward his goal. Later, once he became a hero, there would be time. He wouldn't need to compensate for weakness with conviction anymore. This wasn't the relationship she'd once imagined, but she was fine with it. In a way, this crazy side of Nick was the very Nick she'd fallen for, a necessary evil for now. Months passed and the fourth yearly meeting arrived. Not much happened. Blitz didn't try anything. The government didn't change much. Crimson City kept growing peacefully. Blitz had even become more approachable again. The government had kept its word, adding no more policies that endangered their profits, and in the end they decided that fighting the government wasn't worth the risk. The risk-reward ratio was horrendous. By now, Nick was 36 and had finally become an early expert. Taking only 4 years was already absurdly fast. Since the stronger one became, the slower advancement got. At this rate, he'd reach peak expert by 48. Most people didn't get there until their 80s at the earliest. With so little changing in Crimson City, Nick grew antsy. He wanted to do something to help humanity, but he was essentially done here and just had to wait. So he decided to visit the cave system far to the east of the city. He'd found a ruin there once before, and now that he was immune to the nightmare's influence, he wanted to make use of that. Maybe he'd find something useful to humanity or to himself. Chapter 531, New Specters. Nick left Crimson City without being noticed. That would have been difficult in the past, but with the Nightmare's ability, it was much easier now. There was no more red curtain around the city either, so he could simply jump over the wall. As a powerful expert, he could leap several kilometers at a time while his ability was active, and as long as he turned to smoke mid-jump, nobody would notice him. He'd look like a stray bit of dust in the air. Some people might find that strange, but they'd never guess it was Nick after all. Only a few people from Sky Dream and Arya knew he could turn into mist. So it was easy for Nick to leave the city unnoticed. He told Arya he'd be scouting the surroundings. She'd asked to come along, but he refused. Keeping my ability secret is important. Not even you are allowed to know it, he said. It's related to my survival. Arya was a bit annoyed. She was willing to tell Nick about her own ability, but he wasn't willing to reciprocate. It wasn't what she'd expected. Officially they were in a relationship, but it barely felt like one. They hadn't even kissed yet. Still, she knew being with Nick would be difficult, and in the end she just accepted it and let him go on his own. In the past decade, a few things had changed outside the city. The desert had been eradicated, every attempt to capture it had failed, so the city ordered it exterminated instead. Killing it was far easier than catching it. The land of desires had been caught by the new manufacturer, Desire. The south of the city had filled with infestors, and after years of research, Blitz finally captured the parent Specter, the infestation, a mid-fanatic. Sadly, the domain of the corrosive dust was still there, uncaptured and growing slowly. Over the last 10 years it had crept a kilometer closer to Crimson City. At that rate, it would arrive within 50 years. No one in the city was powerful enough to rival it. Everyone knew exactly where it was, a huge pillar in the middle of its dusty domain, and capturing it just meant suppressing its Zephyx and pulling it away. But it was a late demon at least, and not weak. Its single-target attacks were feeble, but its area attacks were devastating. One late hero would have an easier time against it than 5 mid-heroes, and neither Crimson City nor Darksky City had a late hero, nor would either for another decade, especially since Darksky's old governor had left to become an agent, leaving only an early hero in charge. Either city could ask Aegis for a team of agents, but that meant losing the Specter to them, and both cities wanted to own it. The Forbidden Zone to the north no longer existed, since Aegis had killed the Sea King, and people could finally reach the ocean, though not easily. New Specters had moved in to fill the gap. An army of bloodthirsty sharks, each with the power of a fanatic, some even hero-level though rarer, had made a home along the northern coast, thousands of them, all minions of a single powerful Specter Crimson City believed to be at least a mid-demon, likely late or peak. Stone Crystal City and Metal Works City reported sightings too, meaning the sharks' domain spanned nearly 300 kilometers. They'd plagued the other two cities for decades. Only the Sea King had kept them away from Crimson City, and once it was captured, they moved in here too. They attacked anyone who came near the sea, and sometimes leapt a kilometer or two inland, though doing so weakened them badly, since fanatic or not, sharks fought poorly on land. Even an expert could kill a beached one before it flopped back to the water. The sharks weren't the only new arrivals. To the northeast, a huge green domain had appeared, about 3 kilometers wide, filled with strange, constantly mutating growths that spewed toxins and attacked anything nearby. Luckily, the amalgamation, as it was called, was only an elder. Manufacturers researching it had found traces suggesting it once lived near Metal Works City and had fled here, probably no longer feeling safe there. The sharks and the amalgamation weren't major problems, but the last new Specter was big enough that 3 city specialists had to watch it constantly. The plague vulture, a gigantic decaying vulture that circled the area west of Crimson City. It was a demon, though the city wasn't sure how powerful, and it never came close to the city itself, probably aware it couldn't win against Crimson City alone. But it was patient. It waited every day for the chance that something within the city would go wrong. Because of it, the entire western area was effectively cut off. Even the trip to the iron mine to the southwest had become dangerous. Worse, new Specters kept appearing to the west, since no one could hunt that area anymore. Blitz wanted the plague vulture badly, at any cost, but it was too fast. Every past attempt sent it fleeing north, and while Blitz's heroes could handle the vulture, they couldn't handle it and the sharks at once. The sharks and the vulture never fought each other, and eventually it would return from the ocean to resume circling. It was a constant source of pressure. Arya wanted to request a squad of agents, but 3 things stopped her. First, Blitz opposed it. This was a demon that could be suppressed once caught, and they wanted it badly. Second, the vulture technically wasn't doing enough damage to justify sending agents, who were stretched thin as it was. Third, the city didn't know enough about the sharks. What if they were minions of a fallen? If agents chased the vulture into the ocean and the sharks turned out to belong to a fallen, the whole squad could die, and a group of agents mattered more than a city. For the same reason, the city couldn't ask for a protector either. So Crimson City was stuck with this huge, troublesome bird circling endlessly. In terms of Specter security, the city was in a much worse position than it had been 20 years ago. Chapter 532, Strange Extractor. Nick ran past the mountain east of the city. With the desert dead, there were no more powerful extractors stationed here. Most had moved further north, near the amalgamation. He still remembered the first time he'd left the city, when he'd needed to be extremely careful. No one could be allowed to see him or his team, or they'd be killed. Now, nobody would dare attack him, and only Cujoblitz had anyone who might stand a chance, and even they couldn't stop him from fleeing. Nick's true strength wasn't in battle so much as his ability to escape one, and with every advancement, his methods of escape grew better and more numerous. A few seconds later, he reached his destination, a huge area riddled with holes, crevices, and caves, some barely a few meters deep, others seemingly endless, spread across roughly 4 kilometers. Extractors occasionally searched here for specters but rarely found any. Crimson City was sure some had to be hiding in there, but there was no reliable way to scout the caves. Cujoblitz's shadow shrouds let their extractors move through darkness, but keeping one running cost an insane amount of Zephyx. A damaged shroud left the wearer stranded in the dark, and the deeper into darkness one went, the harder it became to resist the nightmare's influence. As if the nightmare grew stronger with distance from the planet's core, or, as some said, with distance from the sun. Only the sun and abilities that imitated it could hold the nightmare back, and even those eventually failed, which was why nothing worked inside the Fiend of Darkness domain. The cave system had the same problem, just less extreme. Keeping the nightmare at bay simply got far more expensive. Even so, many manufacturers had scouted parts of the caves and drawn maps, though none would share them, and Nick couldn't exactly demand copies. Nor did he want to, since that would reveal where he was headed. With my immunity to darkness, I'm probably the best fit for this job, Nick thought. I don't know if I'll find anything of note, but at least I should find a Specter. This place is too shielded from humans for one not to live here. Places like this were retreats for Specters. The kind that had to kill a human to feed would slip out, kill, and retreat back to wait out the alarm. Specters that didn't need to kill could survive in a city much more easily. Nick looked around and spotted an extractor jumping out of a cave. He raised an eyebrow. The man was wearing Dark Dream's uniform, not Sky Dream's. No mistake about it. Interesting, Nick thought, turning to Mist to follow him. There was only one reason an extractor outside the city would wear Dark Dream's uniform. He didn't know about the merger with Solace, meaning he wasn't from Crimson City at all, most likely an extractor from a neighboring city, masquerading as one of Nick's own. For the next 30 minutes, Nick followed him. The man moved carefully, constantly checking that he wasn't being tailed, then entered a cave, lit a fancy candle, and explored for a while, the flame burning stronger the deeper he went. Eventually, he'd run back out and search another cave. He's just searching for specters, Nick thought, watching him. The man wasn't even very powerful, probably an extractor from another city not strong enough to search its own surroundings, which was why he'd traveled this far. There was no more reason to keep following, but Nick didn't want to start searching the caves himself while this man was still around. In the past, he would have simply killed him. The man was from a rival city, and such people were generally treated as hostile. But since joining Aegis, Nick's view had broadened. All cities belonged to Aegis, and killing someone without good reason just damaged it needlessly. So he decided to watch a bit longer. In the next cave, the man grew surprisingly bold and stopped checking behind him. Eventually, he came upon a mysterious gate, reinforced wood, nearly 4 meters tall. Nick eyed it with interest. Wasn't this exactly what he'd come for? The man gritted his teeth, ran to the gate and kicked it open. Behind it was a long staircase. He cursed, glanced anxiously at his burning candle, then lit a second one. 80,000 credits, he muttered with a sigh. 80,000 credits, Nick thought, surprised. That was absurdly cheap for something offering light that long. He'd have guessed closer to 500,000. After lighting the second candle, the man hurried down the stairs, Nick following. More than a kilometer down, he grew troubled. His candle was burning fast but pushed on, desperate for some return on his investment. They were no longer in a cave but in straight stone hallways, branching at intersections into more halls and stairs, some level, some angled. The architecture was confusing, but Nick had no trouble keeping a mental map. He wouldn't get lost here. After another minute of running through the maze, the man grew agitated again, clearly lost. Shouldn't have gone this far, Nick thought calmly, watching the candle burn away. And then, the man suddenly went still. From 1 second to the next, the panic vanished, replaced by a dead-eyed stare down the hallway. He turned slowly and looked back at an empty corridor. Nick, still smoke, hovered silently behind him. The candle burned out, and everything went dark. The man stared into the blackness a few seconds longer. Nick tensed, but his ability told him he hadn't been noticed yet. Then the man calmly walked toward the wall. And through it. He vanished like a ghost. Even the burnt candle was gone, along with every trace of Zephyx he and it had given off, all of it swallowed by the wall. Nick had a bad feeling. Is this a Specter? He thought, looking at the corridor. Then he thought of all the hallways and staircases he'd passed. Is all of this one Specter? He looked back the way he'd come and flew down the hallway, following his mental map toward the entrance. Finally, he spotted a hallway where the gate should have been, and pushed through it, upstairs, downstairs, through corridors. 10 minutes later, he stopped. The mental map in his head had grown enormous, and worse, it no longer made sense. New hallways had appeared, old ones had vanished, staircases had shifted. Nick remembered what he'd thought as the man's candle burned out. Shouldn't have gone this far. Chapter 533, Labyrinth. Nick was still in his mist form. Turning back into his normal shape right now would be extremely stupid. That extractor was used as a lure, Nick realized. He runs around to bait people into this place. Most likely, if he was attacked, he'd try to save himself by claiming he'd found a mysterious place. It wouldn't even matter if he was killed. He's basically just an apparition created by the main Specter's ability. At most, it would lose a slight bit of Zephyx. And the bait was extremely realistic. It moved convincingly and even gave off a natural stream of Zephyx. He thought about the entrance gate. Is that even still there? What if it vanished too? The cave system was vast, and this labyrinth might run alongside it, creating and destroying entrances at innumerable points. One thing was clear. Nick was stuck, and no rescue was coming anytime soon. I wonder how many people this labyrinth has already caught, he thought. Just one more fly in the web. Or was he? There were a few key differences between him and the others it had caught. First, it still hadn't noticed him. It didn't even know he was there. Second, he was immune to the nightmare's influence. And third, maybe he was too big a bite for it. Specialists essentially never vanished from Crimson City. If one did, the whole city would hear about it. Experts vanished rarely, and as far as Nick knew, none near this cave system. Veterans and Johns vanished the most, and plenty of them wandered through here. If this thing consumes veterans, it's either an adult or an elder. Probably not a fanatic, Nick thought. As long as it doesn't know I'm here, I have a chance. He looked down the hallways. It's obvious what this feeds on: humans getting lost, like the fog in that regard. He eyed one of the walls. I could try breaking one, but that would alert it to my presence, and I'm not even sure how strong they are. For now, I'll stay hidden and look around. He stayed in his fog state to keep himself hidden. If his physical body touched the labyrinth, it might notice him. Nick flew down several hallways. The more he looked, the less sense anything made. For the next 3 hours, he searched through hundreds of kilometers of corridor with no idea where he was anymore. Still, he didn't despair. There has to be logic to this. Since it doesn't know I'm here, it can't be actively manipulating things around me. I refuse to believe this labyrinth stretches across the entire world. He kept searching. A couple of minutes later, he noticed something peculiar: lights turning on in one of the hallways. He stayed hidden and watched. Seconds later, the lights at an intersection came on, and a woman walked out of one hallway and into another, the lights behind her switching off as she passed. Something like that would terrify most humans. What if the lights above them went out and left them stranded in the dark? But she walked with a calm, relaxed pace. Once the lights went out, Nick followed from the darkness, never stepping into the light himself. From the fluctuations, he could tell she was somewhere in the later levels of the veteran stage. Probably an actual human. Makes sense. If this labyrinth kidnaps veterans and feeds on them getting lost, it can feed for decades. Veterans don't need food, water, or sleep. As long as they have light and prefix around them, they won't die easily. After 30 minutes of following the light, the woman stopped. Wonder how long she's been in here. A big gate stood in front of her. I haven't seen a single gate like this in all the hundreds of kilometers I've run, Nick thought. Yet after walking barely a couple of kilometers, she reaches one. The woman sighed in defeat and opened the door. Another round. A chorus of 3 voices spilled out from behind it as soon as she opened it. She sighed again and walked through. The hallway lights switched off quickly, and Nick rushed forward, slipping a fog tendril into the illuminated room, his ability held steady. The next moment, as the woman closed the gate behind her, Nick slipped past it into the room. He found himself in a hall nearly 100 meters wide. At its center stood an ornate stone fountain, spouting clear water into the basin around it, surrounded by trees heavy with fruit and nuts. Light came from a large orb floating overhead. 6 people were inside. The woman he'd followed, 4 men, and 1 more woman, all adults, all rather relaxed and calm. They've probably been here a long time, Nick thought, eyeing the makeshift furniture scattered around. Tents made of clothing, mud huts, mud stools, stone tables. No wood anywhere. They probably don't dare touch the trees, it's their only food source. 3 of the men, Johns, and the ones who'd been shouting, sat on a muddy bench, drinking some foul liquid from stone mugs. Nick noticed a patch of ground nearby, riddled with shovel marks. I've heard alcohol can be made by burying fruit in the ground, he thought. No luck, the woman said, defeated. I'll try again later. Why you do dis, Cap'n? One of the men slurred. Is been like 100 times, juice give up and drank. He punctuated the statement with a swig from his mug. Why do you always talk like that when you're drunk, Jimmy? Another man asked, annoyed. It's annoying. Fact you. Silence. He sighed. Jimmy might be an idiot, but he might be right. Why do you keep trying to get out of here? It didn't work the last 1,000 times. What's different this time? The woman frowned. The difference is we haven't had a late veteran yet. I just became one, and I want to see if I can change something. Melinda, the only male veteran, said heavily. Power won't change anything. What's more power going to accomplish? We can already break all the walls. That's interesting, Nick thought. So they can already break the walls and they're still stuck here. There must be a way, Melinda said. I'm sure the Specter knows we're here, otherwise the lights wouldn't keep turning on and off. It has to manually change the layout to keep us here, and if I run fast enough, I should be able to outrun it. Are you even listening to yourself? The man asked, shaking his head. If that were true, it would just stop turning the lights on. But what if the lights are automatic? Melinda countered. Automatic or not automatic, which is it? He asked, annoyed. The hallways are created manually, but the lights are automatic. It can be both, she answered. He just shook his head, and if it's not? It has to be, Melinda said with conviction. If you just help me and run a different direction, we could overstress its mind. As the two argued, Nick realized something. Funny, it's actually the opposite. The labyrinth doesn't know I'm here, which is why the lights aren't reacting, yet I can run for hundreds of kilometers without finding an end. That would seem unimportant to someone who didn't know much about Specters. Nick knew plenty. If I'm right. He floated back to the door he'd entered from, and this time dared to squeeze through a gap. His ability held. He traveled a couple 100 meters away, and then he materialized, stepping onto solid ground. A smirk crossed his face. Ability still active, just as I thought. Chapter 534, Algorithmic Generation. The captive's conversation had told Nick everything he needed. After confirming his hypothesis, he turned back to black smoke and hid near a corner, unwilling to tempt fate. The lights are manually activated, but what about the corridors? I ran hundreds of kilometers without finding an edge, and I never stumbled onto this place on my own either. If the labyrinth were truly hundreds or thousands of kilometers wide, what are the odds I'd randomly cross paths with one of only 6 captives? I'd need months, maybe years. That means the labyrinth isn't actually big, it's just being constantly reshuffled. No new corridors are being created. The old ones are recycled. So, knowing that sounded great, but most extractors couldn't use it. They could break every wall and run randomly forever and still be stuck. Yet these were exactly the clues needed to break out if you had the experience to connect them. Luckily, Nick had been a chief Zephyx Extractor for over a decade. He knew exactly how Specters worked. All of it pointed to one conclusion. This isn't a force Specter, and it isn't a building. This labyrinth is an algorithmic construct, generating new layouts by shuffling its corridors. The key clue was that Nick had never once seen a corridor being manipulated directly. If the Specter moved things manually, it would surely have done so while unaware he was nearby. That never happened. So the shuffling was automatic, though it could also be triggered manually. Every corridor must be in use somewhere, shuffled by the algorithm in some unintuitive way that keeps people from the exit. If anyone cracks the code or gets too close by accident, the labyrinth reshuffles manually, resetting their progress. Or in the worst case, it just stops lighting the way, forcing a different path. That also explains why the nightmare's influence works in here. It doesn't work inside a Specter's own body or domain, but it works here, which means this is neither. This whole labyrinth is just the manifestation of an ability. It's creating a space. He looked down one of the hallways, which means it isn't fully connected to the Specter. It can't feel this place like its own body. It can't listen everywhere at once, and most importantly, it can't watch everywhere at once either. It can probably only focus on one place at a time, and since it doesn't think anyone else is in here, it'll keep watching the captives while hunting for new victims, which means it won't be looking for me. People searching for enemies rarely check right under their own nose. They're too busy scanning the horizon. I just need to crack the code without being noticed. Then I'm out. Nick returned to the hall's door and slipped to a corner, pressed a bit of mist against it, and tore it free, losing a sliver of Zephyx, leaving a tiny splotch of blood. His recovery was fast enough that he healed within seconds. He repeated the process at the far end of the corridor, altering the splotch's shape slightly. It was small enough that only close inspection would reveal it. A true Force Specter would notice such a mark instantly, but this was only an algorithmic generator. It would have to see the labyrinth with something like eyes, one section at a time. As long as it didn't scan every speck of dust in every corridor, the marks would go unnoticed. Nick marked the center and every entrance of one intersection, then walked one hallway to its far end and back, checking whether the area had shuffled. It hadn't. The hallway, the intersection, and everything visible from it stayed the same. But any hallway that had gone out of sight while he walked had changed, identical in appearance, but the splotches were gone. The shuffling triggers on losing and regaining sight, he realized. Now, how does the shuffling actually proceed? He marked the new entrances and repeated the test, shuffled again and again. By the fifth pass, one of the first hallways had reappeared while the others stayed unmarked. No set layout then. The algorithm builds connections mathematically, not on a repeating pattern. The one thing I can be sure of, the shuffling isn't random. There's logic behind it. He repeated the test for over 2 hours until no new corridors appeared, or at least, the odds had grown small enough that he saw none across 20 straight shuffles. 97 corridors marked so far. Now I need to see how the corridors affect each other. He tried a new corridor for the first time, walked to its end, and found one of his own splotches waiting. So corridors spin too, an exit can become an entrance after a shuffle. That halves the number I actually need to track. Over the next 2 hours, he mapped every marking, eventually counting 53 distinct corridors. Now the intersections and stairs. He spent hours more tracing them, his powerful mind holding every corridor, stair, and intersection in memory, until he'd counted 10 intersections and 6 stairwells, each carefully named and mapped in his head. Nick wanted to take a deep breath, but he was still missed. Now the hard part starts. He entered the first hallway and exited over and over, cataloging every hallway that appeared at each intersection, then repeated it from a different hallway at the same intersection. The results weren't encouraging. No repeating pattern, he thought. Like pi, the same numbers show up eventually, but it always slides back into apparent randomness. Repeats are coincidence. There's probably some overall value driving which corridors appear, and entering or exiting one adds to that value, generating new corridors. But since the pattern never repeats, the values are likely tied to prime numbers. They can't grow forever, they have to reset eventually. But wouldn't that mean the whole thing starts repeating? Unless the final layout seeds the calculation for the next starting number. Nick was beginning to realize just how difficult this was going to be. Well, seems like Crimson City needs to live without me for a few days. I just hope Arya isn't too worried. He wanted to sigh. Chapter 535, Loop. Nick's brain felt like it was burning. Thousands upon thousands of use cases and connections churned through his mind. So many patterns, so much shuffling. For 5 days he'd run through hundreds of thousands of kilometers of labyrinth. Even an expert's mind needed notes to hold onto all of it, and he'd invented his own classification system for connections based on equations between points. The names of the corridors and intersections had long since stopped mattering. Everything in his head was pure connection math now. Eventually, he stopped moving entirely, hovering near a corner for over 8 hours, reviewing the data and running simulations, hunting for an equation that made all the connections make sense. Numbers and equations shot through his mind without end. Another 2 days passed with Nick still motionless. Then he suddenly shot down a hallway, tearing through many others before stopping again for several minutes, then repeating the pattern for hours. The longer it went on, the more his brain seemed to burn, more information retained, more of it accessed simultaneously, his logical thinking pushed to its absolute limit. Hours later, he shot down a hallway again, through 5 intersections and arrived back at his starting point. This time he didn't pause, he shot down the hallway again, through 7 intersections and arrived back at the start once more. Seeing his own starting point again, agitation and excitement rose together. No way, right? He tried again, this time taking 2 staircases, and arrived back at start again. Nick paused for a couple of minutes, then finished his equation and tested it as he flew, successfully predicting every connection point before he reached it. This fucker uses 3 different numerical systems, he thought, equal parts excited and furious. Base 3 for the stairs, base 5 for the intersections, base 53 for the corridors. An equation with 6 variables took shape in his mind. Entrance point, exit point, vision modifier, connection seed, conversion seed, total seed. How the fuck did this thing come up with such an insane algorithm? He tested the equation for several minutes, confirming it predicted every connection, relieved he no longer needed to burn so much brain power on the math. All right, the hardest part's done. Now I need to break it. Sadly, the way this equation is built makes it a closed system. It's literally impossible to find an entrance or exit point. Every variable feeds into another, no matter what I do. This thing can run indefinitely. No matter what path I take, I'll never leave the system. However, he thought back to the room where the humans were gathered. After days of flying, hundreds of thousands of kilometers through a space with only 53 possible hallways, he still hadn't found it again. That means the central room and its approach hallways sit outside the loop. I can't reach it unless the room enters the current total seed, and that only happens manually, which means I have to wait for one of them to leave the room. For the next few hours, Nick flew a route designed to cycle through every possible hallway, intersection, and stairwell in as few shuffles as possible, watching for the moment one connected to the main room. Sure enough, about half a day later, he spotted a new hallway with a John casually strolling through it, unhurried, seemingly bored. Nick memorized every connecting point. All right, this is it. As the man reached the intersection, Nick shot out of the darkness and took physical form in front of him, his ability deactivating for the first time in a week. The man nearly fell over in fright. "Do not move," Nick shouted with authority. "I'm from Aegis and I'm here to save you." The man looked like his heart might stop. Aegis, what's that?" Nick felt a flash of frustration. Aegis had only become common knowledge in Crimson City after the battle with Anatomy. Before that, only strong extractors and powerful people knew of it. This man was a John who'd been trapped in here for years. "I'll explain later," Nick said. "I need you to do one thing for me." The man just stared, dumbfounded. What?" As he asked, lights appeared above Nick. The Specter had recovered from its shock and was now accepting him into its horde, granting him the same protective light it gave the others. It had no idea where this man had come from, but he was here now, and that couldn't be undone. If it let him go, he'd tear apart the ground and caves looking for it, and it wouldn't be able to escape either. It was forced to keep him inside. And unlike the others, this one knew about Aegis. The Specter understood things wouldn't be as simple as before, but it had spent decades perfecting its algorithm. Cracking it should be impossible. As Nick studied the man, the Specter studied a 3-dimensional shape hovering in its perception, focused entirely on the single hallway and intersection where the two of them stood. It knew Aegis was dangerous, but this was its world. It had made the rules here. In here, it was God. "I need you to stay right here," Nick said, pointing between the hallway and the intersection. "Keep the entrance to the main room and most of these hallways in view." The man looked confused. "Okay, anything else?" "No, that's it," Nick said. "I'll handle the rest." The man was almost surprised at how simple that sounded. "Oh, one more thing," Nick added. "If the lights turn off, don't move. You can resist the nightmare for 5 minutes at most. If they turn off, it means the Specter wants you gone from this spot, which means I'm making progress. It means it's panicking. Whatever happens, do not move. Got it?" Sure, I won't," the man said, taking his position. Nick nodded and turned down a hallway, confidence in his eyes. Numbers ran through his mind, and the equation gave him a clear answer. "Well then, shall we go?" he muttered. Bang! Nick charged down the hallway. From outside, the Specter watched him run diagonally toward one of the corners of its structure, rearranging itself in response. He shot into a staircase that, bizarrely, kept angling toward that same corner. The Specter grew suspicious, but then he reached the next intersection and veered down a different hallway entirely, and it relaxed. Then he suddenly stopped, turned, and shot back into the hallway he'd come from. But it had already reshuffled, and the new hallway led directly to the corner it had been guarding. In that instant, the Specter understood. Nick knew exactly where he was going. Numbers cascaded through its mind, and it arrived at a terrifying realization. Overflow. The John near the main room had locked the connecting hallway into the loop. The system could no longer run indefinitely. It was no longer a loop. The Specter had to get rid of the John, linking the room to the loop. So it turned the lights off. Chapter 536, Outside. The lights near the big room went out, and the John immediately panicked. But since Nick had warned him, he simply dropped to his knees, screaming in pain, and didn't move. The Specter noticed he wasn't moving, and things kept getting worse. Its algorithmic construct was excellent at keeping people trapped, but it had no offensive capabilities. A late John like this one could easily survive a few walls collapsing on him. Worse, it couldn't just move the corridors. Anyone who slipped through the gaps created by shuffling would fall straight out of the construct. And this John was sitting right on the edge. If it moved either of the two corridors around him, he'd fall out and land right in front of it. Still, it didn't despair and turned its focus back to Nick. Numbers and equations raced through its mind. There was a way to fold the extra hallway and room into the loop, but that meant rebuilding the entire algorithm, or one overflow would simply become 3 more. It saw Nick nearing the edge and manually shuffled corridors to block him. Nick ran at incredible speed, numbers and equations streaming through his mind, no longer thinking in directions, only entering whichever hallway pushed the value toward what he wanted. He didn't even realize he was running straight for a corner. Seeing him close in, the Specter deactivated the algorithm and rearranged the rooms by hand. It saw him veer away and started to relax. Then Nick suddenly stopped at an unexpected mark that didn't fit the numbers. It switched to manual shuffling, he thought, and smirked. I won. Why did the algorithm matter so much? Why did it even exist? Speed. That was the whole point. Bang! Nick charged through a random wall into a new corridor. The Specter grew nervous again. Bang, bang, bang. He charged randomly, through the top here, through a side there, no rhyme or reason, corridors and rooms shuffling faster and faster. From outside, the construct looked like an unstable domain thrashing in a frenzy, rooms and corridors popping up in wildly irrelevant directions. The Specter's mind reeled, trying to repair the labyrinth and stop Nick from breaking free at the same time, like a person trying to catch a fly with their bare hands. Bang! He broke through another wall and light flickered in his eyes for an instant. He'd seen the walls shift. I'm at the edge. Boom! Nick exploded with light, blinding the Specter for a moment. It had seen where he was headed and dumped a wall of corridors in that direction, but when it recovered a second later, he was gone. Bang! A loud explosion echoed through its domain, and then it saw a blue dot slipping out the opposite side of the labyrinth entirely. That had been the plan all along. Get close enough to the edge to send the Specter into a panic, then reverse and sprint the other way. Every corridor behind him would get dumped in front, since it assumed he'd keep pushing forward. It was the same reason flies were so hard to catch, a sudden 90 or even 180-degree turn without losing speed, while the eye kept tracking the predicted path and lost the fly entirely. It just seemed to vanish. The blue dot grew, and a moment later it was Nick-sized again. He took stock of his surroundings. Behind him stood a construct of blue lines, roughly 5 meters wide and tall, the labyrinth he'd just escaped. And there was something else. The Specter. On the ground lay a 3-meter slug with a human brain jutting from its front. Seeing it, most of Nick's tension melted away. Its Zephyx wasn't very dense, somewhere between initial and mid-elder, and more importantly, its body wasn't built for combat. Powerful, maybe, but useless in a fight. Shing! Blades shot from his sleeves as he eyed the slug. I concede, a voice said in his mind, the slugs. I can't fight you, don't kill me. I can produce Zephyx for you, it added quickly. Nick studied it for a second, then pointed at the construct. Make light for the people inside. Done, it answered. Nick glanced over but saw no change. To him, it was just a scatter of dots and a chaotic mess of lines and circles. You're going to Crimson City with me. You should know how manufacturers work, he said. I do, I will comply. Is this transportable? He asked, gesturing at the construct. Yes. Keep it running. I don't want to dump those people into a dark cave. Keep it active while we walk to the surface. You go first. If I see anything fishy, I'll kill you, Nick said, clipped and quick. I understand, the slug said, and started moving in what looked like a random direction. It wasn't very fast, but faster than a human. After about 10 minutes, they reached a pile of rocks blocking the way. I caused an avalanche to seal my hideout. Break the stones, it said. Nick did, revealing a new stretch of cave behind them. A couple of minutes later, he saw light again. They were outside. Deactivate your construct, Nick ordered the moment they emerged. Affirmative. The blue lines shuddered and scattered, leaving behind a few dots that expanded into 6 confused, shocked humans. What was going on? The John who'd spoken to Nick earlier lit up had it worked. Then he saw Nick and could hardly believe it. They were out. Thank you so much, he shouted, bowing over and over. The others looked between him and Nick. What's going on? The female veteran asked. You're free, Nick said calmly. I captured the Specter. They looked at the slug. This was what had held them for years. Not even a force Specter, just a slug. Nick calmly wrapped a couple of Zephyx suppressors around it. It didn't dare resist, then rammed 2 spears through its body, unwilling to carry it by hand. Holding it aloft on his spears, he glanced at the group. Crimson City has changed a lot since you've been gone. He looked pointedly at the male veteran's uniform. You, for instance, are unemployed, and you should be glad about it. Honestly, getting caught by this slug was the best thing that could have happened to you. The man looked down at his own uniform, shocked. Anatomy's crest. If you need work, go to the city center and tell them the liaison sent you, Nick said, then jumped away, heading west before anyone could ask a single question. He reached the city in under a minute, the slug silent the whole way, and walked calmly toward one of the entrances. The guard's eyes went wide. El liaison. Yes, I'm back, Nick said, giving the slug a small shake. This guy kept me occupied a while. Could you tell Arya I'm back? Chapter 537, Big Brain Slug. I was worried sick about you, Arya shouted in Nick's office. Sorry, he answered neutrally, but there wasn't much I could have done about that. Why did you even go alone? Something could have happened. I told you, Nick said, still neutral. I don't want you to learn about my ability. Arya took a deep breath, holding her anger in check. Why would that be so bad? We're in a relationship. Our lives are connected. How is it possible you'd rather risk your life than tell your girlfriend a bit more about it? Nick frowned. I already told you, the secret of my ability is the most important thing I own. It can be countered relatively easily by anyone who knows about it. Just telling you that much already puts me at risk. At risk? How is me knowing dangerous to you? Do you think I'd tell some random person or Specter about your secrets? Arya looked insulted. Even if we had some kind of falling out, I wouldn't unveil them. That would be a betrayal of this relationship and of myself. The fact that I never told you about the shady things Kugelblitz did while I still worked there is proof enough. Nick showed no reaction for a while. 0.0001 is infinitely higher than 0, he finally said. Even if you used your entire power and mind to protect my secret, there'd still be ways to get it out of you. Jenny is a good example. Arya glared at him. She loved him, wanted this relationship, yet he always kept his distance. He'd agreed to be with her, said he loved her, and still stayed apart, acted alone, kept every secret to himself. How was that a relationship? Wasn't a relationship built on trust? If you couldn't trust your partner, why be with them at all? Some people might say sex, status, or wealth, but none of that applied here. Nick had no interest in sex. His status outranked hers. And though he wasn't as rich as she was, he didn't need more money. What's even the point of this relationship? I don't get it, she thought, annoyed. I think it's better we stop here for today, Arya said. Nick nodded. They traded a few empty, uninteresting sentences before she left his office. Once she was gone and his ability reactivated, Nick sighed. I have no idea what to do. I want to tell her more, but I can't. It would put her in danger. Interestingly, he wasn't thinking of any external threat. He meant himself. There was a thought he'd carried for years now, one he'd never quite shaken. What if my ability grows stronger the more unknown it stays? The null kills everything that learns too much about it. What if mine gets stronger the fewer people in the world know it exists? He remembered how the Champion of Light had told him, deliberately, to keep the ability secret even from the other 2 shields. There had to be a deeper reason for that, if even his closest allies weren't meant to know. Nick wasn't certain, but he didn't want to risk it. He also couldn't shake the feeling that being close to him was simply dangerous. Almost everyone who'd ever gotten close to him was dead. His family, Trevor, Wintour, Julian, Albert. Only Jenny had lasted. He knew logically there was no curse forcing him from one tragedy to the next, but he still didn't feel safe letting anyone closer. The closer someone got, the more he feared their death. He shook his head. Can't solve this now. Focus on something that actually matters. Nick left his office and went down to the containment units, though not to enter one. Instead, he sought out one of the local extraction captains. Since the city wasn't technically a manufacturer, it had no single chief Zephyx Extractor. The job was split among 5 people, each responsible for Specters of one level. He went to the one in charge of elders. Now the captain should have finished a basic profile on the new Specter, and sure enough he had. The slug's official name was Big Brain Slug, a mid-elder and a valuable one, since working with it was easy and open to nearly anyone. The more people got lost in its labyrinth, the more Zephyx it produced, and weaker extractors could work with it too. They hadn't yet tested what ability it might grant, but even without that, it would likely be the most valuable mid-elder in the city. Capturing it had handed the city a real treasure, and that wasn't all. 5 of the 6 people Nick had rescued had joined the city guard. 2 veterans and 3 Johns weren't a massive addition, but they weren't nothing either. After reading the report, Nick paid the Big Brain Slug a visit. No one was working with it yet. The captain still needed to build a shift plan and train extractors on it. Since you came peacefully, your Zephyx confiscation rate is 90%. You keep 10%, Nick said. The slug showed no reaction. It had expected as much. 90% was low but common. However, Nick continued, you have a unique chance to improve that ratio. Some Specters get lower rates for helping us in unique ways. I've worked with one for years that only pays 75%. It still didn't react, but Nick could sense it paying closer attention now. How can I improve my rate? It asked flatly. You can communicate, Nick said, and you're intelligent and you've lived out there a long time. You want information. Correct, I want to know more about the cave system and what we can find in it. What do I get? Depends how valuable it is, Nick said. I'm willing to drop your rate to 50% until we've recouped a multiple of the information's value. If it's not worth much, that rate lasts a couple of days. If it's extremely valuable, it could stay that low for decades. The slug weighed its options. How do I know you'll keep your word? I'm not human, your laws don't protect me. Because we both know what happens next, Nick said. You'll give us something cheap first to see if we honor the deal. If we do, you give us something better and so on. If I break my word, you simply stop giving us anything. I know that, you know that, we all know that. The slug considered it. I accept, it said a few seconds later. Nick nodded. Then what's your first piece of information? There's a level 2 possession Specter hidden in one of the caves. Just walk up and take it, no offensive capabilities. It's deep in the cave though, and you'll need a lot of light. Nick showed no reaction, but he felt like he'd struck gold. The very first secret had already netted him an adolescent possession Specter. All right, he said. We'll verify it, and if it checks out, your rate drops to 50% for about a week. A week, that's not much. Slug, Nick said, you're not going to be working with just 6 weak people at a time anymore. This containment unit is about to get very crowded. A week is more than enough. Chapter 538, Past Civilizations. A couple of months passed, and the Big Brain Slug shared a few more secrets. The short excursion had paid off well. The city's Zephyx production rose about 5% from the slug alone, and its additional tips pushed earnings even higher. Reaching Aegis' new tribute goal was no longer difficult, and the city had capital to spare for reinvestment. The number of extractors kept climbing too, as smaller manufacturers needed more people to search for Specters. About 10% of the city's population, roughly 1,200 people, were now extractors. 400 newbies, 500 Johns, 200 veterans, 70 experts, and 30 specialists. Crimson City's Specter count kept rising as well, gaining far more than it lost. Since Aegis tribute scaled with the power and number of Specters a city held, more Specters meant a higher tribute. But the Big Brain Slug alone raised the city's income enough to offset it, since the city gave 90% of its Zephyx to Aegis, compared to the 30–40% manufacturers paid. The more Specters the city itself owned, the easier that tribute became. Nick hadn't left the city in months. He'd originally wanted to investigate the cave system further, but with the slug's information, he no longer needed to, he just had to wait for it to talk. Eventually it did. After handing over a few hatchlings and adolescents as goodwill, it agreed to share something important. Nick listened, and when he came out, he knew capturing it had been a genuine boon to humanity. After a quick argument with Arya, who wanted to come, and was refused as always, since his destination was buried in darkness, and he didn't want her learning he was immune to the nightmare, he set off for the cave system. It took a while, but he found the cave the slug had described, then made his way down. The darkness grew more pervasive the deeper he went, though he could still see as clearly as day or night, though that distinction barely mattered since the sun always shone. The cave system was complex, forcing detours through tight cracks. He could have simply dug through stone by hand, but a collapse might bury his target. It took him nearly 2 hours, getting lost more than once before he arrived. He looked at what stood before him with narrowed eyes. A metal door. A ruin. The slug had mentioned a human ruin buried in the caves, though it claimed not to know what was inside. Nick hadn't quite believed that at first. Why wouldn't it look? But its answer was simple. There are no humans there. Specters only cared about growing stronger, and that meant humans. No reason to bother. He studied the crooked door, set at a 60-degree angle, clearly not by design. Worse condition than the last one I found, he thought. I'm about 5 kilometers down. Nobody builds this deep on purpose, just getting here is a nightmare. This place probably used to sit higher up and sank, maybe from an earthquake. He touched the door. Zephyx, he thought, running a hand over the cold metal. Not a ruin of the ancient ones. This is one of the other past civilizations. Over the last decade, Nick had learned a lot about them, partly from Julian, partly from the classified information Aegis granted its governors, so they could recognize and report anything they found. According to Aegis, roughly 20,000 years had passed since the ancient ones vanished, though that was the low end of the estimate. Some ran as high as 150,000. He pressed harder against the wall and it began to bend and crack. Not very durable, he thought, easing off. There's Zephyx in these walls, but nothing like the sophistication of the ancient ones' work. The fusion feels crude, like they just dumped steel into Zephyx and called it done. And it must have taken a long time to sink this deep. Probably the recovering ones. According to Aegis, 5 civilizations had existed, possibly more, though evidence was thin beyond that. The first, the ancient ones, had wielded unmatched technology, weapons that could level continents, the power to harvest energy from other worlds. Then they vanished, and in time a second civilization rose. That civilization, the ruins showed, spent its history trying to recover the ancient ones' lost knowledge while slowly mastering Zephyx on its own, though slowly was the operative word. The gap between their oldest and newest ruins was larger than the equivalent gap for the ancient ones, and even near the end, their technology lagged behind what Aegis had today. Aegis could produce better materials from Zephyx than the recovering ones ever managed. The current civilization surpassed them easily. Still, the recovering ones vanished eventually too, and the enlightened ones rose in their place, named for how fast they developed. The gap between their oldest and newest ruins was far narrower than the ancient ones, and their technology outclassed everything Aegis had access to now, their mastery of Zephyx roughly equal to Aegis' own. They vanished too in time. The fourth civilization, the Suffering Ones, earned their name from how rare their ruins were, small, crude, and isolated, suggesting either a tiny population or one forced to live scattered and alone. They'd been only marginally more advanced than the recovering ones, and like the rest, they too disappeared. Then came the current civilization, advanced by past standards, but not the best of them. The enlightened ones still held the overall edge, and the ancient ones the technological one. Given the crudeness of this wall and its low Zephyx sophistication, Nick guessed it belonged to the recovering ones or the suffering ones, though if it were the latter, not enough time could have passed for it to sink this deep. A ruin from the recovering ones, he thought. Wonder what's inside. He approached the door. Chapter 539, Hot. Nick approached the door and looked at the console on the wall. No power, he thought. The power source for this ruin isn't working anymore. He pushed against the door. The metal creaked, but nothing more. Thought I could break through, but apparently not. Not hard exactly, just thick. Well, there were other ways in. He drew his blades and sank them into the door. They cut through like butter, and he began carving pieces away. The material was about 4 times harder than normal steel, but that meant nothing to an expert. With his ability active, he could exert force equivalent to a 1,000-ton animal. Not enough to push through, but plenty to carve. Within a minute he'd cut a tunnel 2 meters deep. He paused to press against the wall ahead. It creaked, nothing more. This has to be tens of meters thick. Why build walls this thick? He kept cutting. At 15 meters he felt a difference. Might be able to break through now. Bang bang. He rammed both blades into the seam between the doors and pushed sideways. Creak crack. The metal bent and his blades lost their grip. I can open it, but the metal can't handle the leverage, it just bends. He'd already tried pushing both sides apart at once, but his body wasn't wide enough. More digging then. A few minutes later he was 20 meters in. This is one thick wall, he thought, still cutting. Then he pushed again and felt the metal give in a way that suggested he was close. Crack creak. Cracks spread ahead of him as he pushed. A small, deep fissure opened, and a blinding beam of light shot through it. Nick froze in confusion. Light, but the power source shouldn't be active. How? Then something terrifying happened. His barrier flooded with warnings and blared an alarm. His eyes went wide and he bolted out of the hole. Boom! The doors slammed shut behind him. Luckily, they were designed to seal when unpowered rather than the reverse. Nick found himself back outside the hole, darkness restored, sweat covering his body. He checked his barrier's display. 20%. That was all the Zephyx he had left. Too close. He took a moment to calm down, then tapped through his barrier's readings. Radiation, he thought, furrowing his brow. Radiation shouldn't threaten his body. Mortals feared it because it destroyed DNA, turning a body into one giant tumor, but powerful Extractors' DNA repaired itself fast enough to shrug that off. The only way radiation threatened an Extractor was in doses so extreme it effectively became a laser. And that, according to his barrier, was exactly what had just happened. The instant that sliver of light appeared, the barrier had read it as a heat-based energy attack and blocked it. Only afterward, digging through the readings, did Nick realize it was actually radiation. The radiation gauge had simply broken, its line rocketing straight from bottom to top. His barrier was aegis-issued, more advanced than anything in Crimson City. A lesser one might have gotten him killed. Some kind of defense mechanism, probably not. Then what is it? It's not alive. My ability never deactivated through any of this, so the odds of a Specter are low. He couldn't land on an answer. Anything with this much destructive power was almost always a Specter, but a Specter would have noticed him and killed his ability. And this whole area was sealed behind absurdly thick walls. How would a Specter even grow this powerful in here? If it were one, it should be strong enough to simply break out. Unless it's a possession Specter, he thought. But that's ridiculous, this much radiation. It'd have to be a demon at least. I should check. He rammed his blade into the wall and carved out a large panel, bending it into a makeshift shield. This material seems to block the rays. As long as I stay covered, I should be fine. He pushed back into the hole, shield forward, and resumed digging carefully, trying to keep the final layer as thin as possible so he wouldn't need much force to pry the doors apart. After a bit more digging, he felt the wall heating tremendously. Is that why the walls are so thick? He kept going and noticed something odd. The gap between the doors wasn't straight anymore. It didn't look man-made at all. Looking back at the tunnel he'd cut, he realized the gap had looked straight the whole way until now. He understood immediately. That's why they were so hard to pry apart. The metal inside is molten. The doors were fused together and I just broke that fusion. The metal ahead had reached a temperature that would melt ordinary steel, but Zephyx, strengthened as it was, it held its shape. The heat around him was intense, though his body could take it. Should be close now. He made sure his shield covered his whole body and pulled a spear, wedging it against the right side of the hole, then grabbed a second and held it horizontal, extending it. Bang bang. The butt struck the left side while the tip struck the second spear on the right, spreading the force instead of just punching a hole. He pushed his own strength into the extension. Creak. The walls groaned. Bang. Light spilled past his shield, and the shield itself began heating fast. His barrier flared as some of the light reflected back onto him, though a reflection was nothing next to a direct hit. Both ends of his spears glowed red and warped. They weren't built for this kind of heat. The radiation's power was absurd. Nick ran a quick test. He cracked open his barrier, extended his arm, and touched the tip of his left index finger into the light. He yanked it back instantly. His finger had turned red and black. Completely denatured, he thought, and sliced it off with a blade, a new one already forming. Veterans could regrow limbs. Experts did it even faster, a full minute for Nick. Next he reshaped part of his barrier and extended a sliver of it into the light, not to block this time, but to let the rays through and analyze them. It flickered but held. A few seconds later he pulled it back and checked the readings. He took a deep breath. High density of Zephyx, recently converted from Prefix. This is a fucking Specter. Chapter 540, Too Hot. SSSS. Ah fuck, Nick thought, looking down. Liquid metal was pouring from the opening, sliding past his shield. Crack bang. A deafening bang exploded to his left and the light vanished. His spear, unable to hold its shape under the heat, had snapped under the door's pressure and exploded, and they slammed shut again. At the same moment, the metal seized around his shoes. Nick tore free, breaking his shoes, and landed clear of the hole. Inside, the molten metal slowly solidified, but not before warping and half-melting his shield. He stared back at the hole. A fucking Specter, actually a fucking Specter, and it has to be a possession Specter, a fucking demon possession Specter. He remembered Ghosty's theory. A possession Specter's power scaled with how much suffering the object had caused. How much suffering had this one caused? And why was it in here? Was this thing surrounded by metal before it became a Specter or after? He glanced up, gauging the depth. Is the Specter's creation related to why this building sank so deep? Could be. Can't be sure, not enough information. He tapped through his barrier until an image appeared. The barrier had photographed the light while measuring it. Nick studied it, frowning. About as expected. The light source was a blinding white sphere, though he couldn't tell if that was the object itself or just glare washing it out. Can't tell the distance either. 10 meters or a kilometer, no way to know. If it's within 10 or 100 meters of the edge, this is a demon. Further than that, it could be a fallen. I should measure the building. Demon and Crimson City can handle it. Fallen, and we need Aegis. He put the display away and returned to digging through the surrounding stone, and soon noticed the shape of the building. It's round. That helps. He had his barrier calculate the circumference from a small sampled arc, then ran the numbers assuming a perfect sphere. Diameter of about 100 meters, walls around 30 meters thick, so the open space inside should be about 40 meters across. If the thing's centered in there, it's roughly 20 meters from the wall. With that distance and the radiation's intensity, I can estimate its power. He worked the math. Early or mid-demon, probably mid. He frowned. Capturing the big brain slug was worth the risk after all. Now we just need to suppress and contain it. He considered the sheer size of the problem. Easier said than done. Simplest option would be hauling the whole building out, but that thing has to weigh over 1,000,000 tons. Shave off the outer 20 meters and we'd cut that by over 90%, still tens of thousands of tons. We'd need Arya to carry it. He narrowed his eyes as the plague vulture crossed his mind. Impossible. If Arya leaves the city for more than a few seconds, that thing might attack, which means I can only count on my specialists. He kept digging as he planned, confirming after about an hour that the building really was spherical. This is going to take a long time, he thought, eyeing the metal walls. Just excavating down to this depth would be years of work on its own. I should get back and tell Arya. He had his barrier mark the location on a map, then made his way back up through the caves, barely 2 minutes this time, now that he knew the route. On the surface, he found the exact point above the buried building, marked it, and headed for Crimson City. When Arya saw him at headquarters, she sighed in relief. You were gone a while. Got lost in the caves, Nick said. Anyway, I've got good news and bad news. Which first? Bad news, she said with a sigh. We've got a huge project ahead of us, years of work, a lot of powerful extractors. Arya brightened. That sounds like good news. Why would you commit that many resources to something that isn't worth it? Nick scratched his head. Guess so. The good news is we found a non-sentient mid-demon possession Specter. Silence. Arya's eyes went wide. A mid-demon possession Specter. That was insane. Are you serious? She asked. Nick nodded and told her what he'd found. Her excitement dimmed as he described the readings and showed her the image. You said there was molten metal, she asked. Right, started flowing the moment the crack opened. How tall was the crack? Started about a meter up, ran another 80 centimeters higher, Nick said. She nodded, frowning. Show me the picture again. He did. She grimaced. There's no reflection. Reflection. She pointed at it. The metal reached your position and the crack starts 10 meters up, so the pool has to be at least a meter deep. If it were only that deep, we'd see the light reflecting off it, the way water reflects sunlight. But there's none. Nick worked through it. The metal had to be deep enough to reach the crack, yet showed no reflection, meaning its actual level had to be higher than his camera, which had been at roughly 160 centimeters. That meant at least 80% of the crack's height was submerged. Probably all of it. The hole just hadn't flooded instantly because the metal was so viscous. He looked at the image again, and with that context it became far more frightening. His earlier math had all been correct, assuming there was only air between him and the object. But there hadn't been. The light hadn't traveled 30 meters of air to reach his camera. It had traveled 10 meters of air and 20 meters of molten metal. This thing was visible through 20 meters of molten metal. It could have killed him in under a second, shining straight through 20 meters of metal. Nick, that's not a demon, Arya said. He took a deep breath. I'm realizing that now. That's a fallen and not a weak one. He ran the numbers again. Has to be a late fallen at least. Silence stretched several seconds. I'm calling Aegis, Nick said. Arya nodded. You should. Chapter 541, Investigating the Specter. Nick and Arya waited in a plaza in the outer city, looking skyward. They'd contacted Aegis minutes earlier, and Aegis promised to send a scout. Dispatching a protector was a serious commitment, one Aegis wouldn't make lightly. Someone from Aegis' main force needed to confirm the Specter's power firsthand. Before long, they spotted someone flying toward the city. Arya raised her arm and fired a beam of light skyward, drawing stares from everyone nearby. The flyer changed course toward it. Xiang. The man appeared before them almost instantly, 30s, long green hair, an agent's uniform. Arya could tell he was considerably stronger than her. She guessed late or peak hero. He nodded at her before turning a furrowed gaze on Nick. Identify yourself. Nick Dusk, Nick said, bowing politely. Liaison, a new position created by Aegis, above governors but below agents. The man looked skeptical but let it go. He wasn't here to police the city, just to check a Specter. Where is it? East of the city. Did you bring enough light? The message said to, I did. I'll lead you there, Nick said. But the man turned to Arya instead. Come with us. I'm sorry, she said politely, but I can't leave the city. Explain, he said, displeased. She pointed west. He focused there for a moment, and his eyes lit with recognition. If I leave, it might attack, she said, meaning the plague vulture. That's a problem, he admitted. Fine, stay here. He turned back to Nick and pulled out a small device, tapping through it for a few seconds, apparently deciding, now that he'd be alone with Nick in the dark, to verify his identity. He checked the local database on his digital assistant. The device couldn't reach Aegis' main network, so for security, every agent got an updated database once a year. As long as the liaison position was less than a year old, it would show up, and it did. The number of liaisons and their identities, though, were confidential. A barrier flared around him, and he pressed a button. Nick's barrier briefly lit up in response. The man nodded. Fine, lead the way. Nick had cleared every check. He was Aegis confirmed. Of course, Nick said, and jumped east out of the city. The man took to the air and followed. Seconds later, they reached the cave network. The Specter is about 5 kilometers down, inside a ruin built by the recovering ones. We can travel the caverns about a minute or dig straight down, Nick said. The man frowned. No ruin was in the report. Because it's basically just a shell now, Nick said. The Specter puts out enough radiation to melt every scrap of metal around it. I doubt anything inside survived. The man wasn't fully satisfied but didn't press it. We're making a hole. Don't resist, he said, grabbing Nick's arm and flying to the side. Here good, he asked, pointing down. Yes, that leads to the entrance, Nick said, dangling from his grip. The agent aimed his free hand at the ground, and it screamed a scream of pure terror, with faded, screeching human faces twisting inside the green force that shot from his palm. It struck the ground, which crumbled to pebbles and then to dust, the cloud billowing outward and growing as the two of them descended into it, the world darkening around them. Ding! The agent's barrier lit up. Nick eyed it, surprised. Weight barriers can make light from an extractor's own Zephyx. Then he traced the source. It wasn't drawing from the man himself, but from a solid brick of Zephyx in his pocket, several kilos worth. Aegis demanded huge amounts of Zephyx from every city, and this was one of the uses. Agents needed light, and converting Zephyx to light was the most reliable way to get it. Bang! The screaming cut off as the man broke through into a cavern, then swept his arm upward, blasting the dust cloud out through the hole above. Light returned, with the sun directly overhead. It reached even this depth through a gap barely 2 meters wide. The man looked around, unimpressed. We need to go deeper, Nick said. About another kilometer. The man scowled and pointed downward again. The scream returned, and 30 seconds later they reached another cavern. He dispersed the dust and immediately spotted the ruin's walls. This is it. Yes, Nick said. The man set him down in the cave's one bright spot, the pillar of light from the 5-kilometer shaft above, and approached the ruin. Careful, Nick warned. A sliver of that light took almost all my Zephyx. The man said nothing and stepped into the hole. Nick watched from the light, hoping arrogance wouldn't kill him. But the man wasn't that reckless. He eased the door open, and a beam of light shot out. Nick couldn't see past it to know what he was doing. A few seconds later the light died and the man walked back out. You did the right thing calling us, he said. Can't get a clean reading through all that molten metal, but at minimum it's an early fallen. At most peak, most likely mid-fallen. Nick took a breath and nodded. What's the plan? I'll file a report. Crimson City already has an open work order, something about clearing the Crimson Sea, currently low priority. This will probably get folded into it and bump the priority way up. Expect a protector within a few weeks. Thank you, Nick said. The man nodded, and they made their way back up through the long shaft. On the surface, he left to file his report, and Nick returned to the city. Life went on for a while. Then 3 weeks later, 5 people arrived outside the city, all in Aegis uniforms. 4 wore 3 stripes protectors. The most striking was their leader, an old man with long silver hair, 4 stripes on his uniform. A justiciar, a peak protector. This is Crimson City, sir, one of the protectors said. The old man turned his head toward the city, his empty black eye sockets seeming to fix on it from a distance. Get the governor, he said, his voice smooth. Chapter 542. The Crimson Sea is suppressed. Nick and Arya bowed respectfully before the 5 people in front of them. We are here to deal with 2 matters, one of the protectors said. First, the Crimson Sea. Of course, Arya answered. Is there anything you need? A large map appeared in the man's hand, floating before him, Crimson City and its surroundings, including the new western districts. Mark the Crimson Sea, he said, handing it to Arya. She drew a wide circle over nearly the entire city. How deep is it? He asked evenly. Not sure, more than 20 meters, less than 50. He scratched his beard and turned to the justiciar. Sir. Only a fanatic, the old man said, emotionless. Standard procedure. Of course, the protector said, turning back to Arya. Open a path to it. Naturally, Arya said, flying toward the city. The 4 protectors stayed put, but the justiciar drifted after her. Nick watched them land near the city's edge, where Arya pulled a set of plates from the ground, exposing the Crimson Sea to open sky for the first time in years. Countless eyes floated in the endless red, all staring blankly upward. The Crimson Sea, sir, Arya said, stepping aside. The justiciar floated forward until he hovered just above it. At that moment, every eye in the sea gathered into a single massive one, fixed on him. He showed no reaction, drifting down until he touched the surface, then lowered his hand into the giant eye and stirred it lightly, as casually as dipping a hand in bathwater. Whoom! A ripple ran through the sea and it began to rise. Arya watched, startled, as it gained 2 extra meters of depth it had advanced, but the justiciar didn't look surprised at all. He probably made it advance on purpose, she thought, studying his calm expression. He kept staring into the huge eye with his own empty sockets. Then the blackness there began to churn, threads of purple twisting through it like whirlpools, the kind that looked ready to pull her in just from watching. Whoom! The entire Crimson Sea shuddered violently, as if an earthquake had struck beneath it, the shaking growing stronger by the second. After several seconds, Arya noticed the eye shrinking, as though it were being drawn up into the justiciar's arm. The red at the edges began fading into clear water, spreading inward until only a small puddle remained beneath him. Then he withdrew his hand, pulling free a 2-meter cube of crimson liquid. A Specter cage appeared before him, and the cube was placed inside, collapsing and lurching violently against the walls. Bang! The cage door slammed shut before it could break free. That was it. The Crimson Sea was suppressed just like that. Arya could hardly believe how easy it looked, a problem that had haunted Crimson City for almost 2 decades, solved in minutes. Do you want to know how this works? The justiciar asked, looking in a seemingly random direction. Arya was caught off guard. He hadn't struck her as a man of many words. Yes, sir. 4 Specters have finer classifications, but they won't matter until your mastery of Zephyx manipulation reaches a certain level, he said calmly. The Crimson Sea isn't a sea. It's a Specter attached to water the way you're attached to your body, except it can survive without one. Arya understood. Much like a person could be said to really be their brain, with the body just a vehicle, the justiciar had pulled the brain free of the Crimson Sea's body without killing it. If you ever join Aegis as an agent, you'll learn this properly, he said. Thank you for explaining, Arya said respectfully. He didn't answer, only floated off toward the surface. She glanced once more at the clear water below. The sea's rise had left barely 3 meters between the surface and the city floor. It's clean, she thought, pure water, no dirt at all. Where did it all go? She shook her head and left, rejoining the group above. The justiciar had already handed off the Specter cage to one of his people. The Crimson Sea's dealt with, one of the protectors said. Where's the radiation specter? I'll take you, Nick said, stepping forward. The protector frowned, but the justiciar spoke first. Lead the way. The protector stepped aside without another word. Of course, sir, Nick said, running toward the cave system. The group followed, and they soon reached the hole, much of it already collapsed again. 5 kilometers down from here, Nick said. The agent who investigated it dug this hole, but it caved in. One of the protectors stepped forward and pointed at it without a word. Woo him. The air beneath his hand warped and vanished into the hole. 10 seconds passed. You first, he told Nick, gesturing at it. Sure, Nick said, and jumped in. As he fell, he noticed the hole had returned to its original depth, every trace of dust and rubble gone, not even a lingering cloud. Looking up, he saw the man floating down just above him. How'd you do that? Nick asked. The man looked mildly annoyed at being asked. Compression. I used the stone and dust to reinforce the walls. Thanks for explaining, Nick said carefully, not wanting to push his luck. This is taking too long, the protector said a moment later, pointing at Nick. Nick's eyes widened as the air between them warped. Woo him. The world twisted, and 1/10 of a second later Nick felt solid ground under his feet. Xiang, xiang, xiang. 5 figures dropped out of the hole above him, barriers glowing faintly as they hovered. Is that it? One of the protectors asked, eyeing the metal wall ahead. Nick looked over. Sure enough, they'd arrived. Yes, it's inside. The interior's filled with liquid. We know, the protector said. The report was thorough. We've all read it. Scout, the justiciar said. One of the protectors flew forward and stopped before the half-ruined door. A justiciar was far too valuable to risk first. If anything went wrong, the scout would take the hit instead. Nick watched him step through the doorway. Moments later, blinding light spilled from the hole, then vanished. 5 seconds later, the scout didn't reemerge. He went in and shut the door behind him, Nick guessed. A full minute of silence passed before the light flared again. The scout stepped back out, closed the door, and turned calmly to the justiciar. Mid-fallen possession specter, he reported. A ball of fire that converts prefix into radiation. It produced Zephyx the moment I let its light touch my skin. Chapter 543, Reward. Anything else in the ruins? The justiciar asked. No, sir, the scout answered. Everything else has liquefied. What era? Another protector stepped forward. Crude composite material, architectural style typical of the recovering ones. Crude by our standards, but advanced for them. My guess is this was built within the last 20% of their reign. The justiciar didn't look at him. Any guess how this possession specter grew this powerful? 2 of the protectors exchanged a glance. Each had their own specialty. One on past civilizations, one on city law, one on Specter theory, and the last just a scout. It's a giant burning fireball giving off massive radiation, correct? The Specter researcher asked the scout. Yes, about 5 meters across. Incredibly powerful, its radiation burns through my Zephyx faster than I can recover it. The researcher rubbed his chin. A possession specter needs to possess something living or dead. A fireball isn't alive, so it must have possessed an object. But fireballs that size don't usually last. If this were just a momentary explosion, the odds of it becoming a specter would be minuscule. It must have stayed stable for a while first. He turned to the civilization researcher. Any ancient technology that produces long-lived balls of fire? Nuclear fusion, the man answered with a nod. The recovering ones never managed to convert Zephyx into electricity. None of them were creative enough to arrive at the Orwell Mandrake model, so true access to Zephyx's power stayed locked away from them. Fusion fuses nuclei for energy, high theoretical output, but the control systems needed to keep it stable are error-prone and eat up a lot of that energy. Can you get to the point? He sighed. It makes a big ball of fire used as a power source. Thank you, the Specter researcher said. Now, could that ball have caused a lot of suffering? You're applying the ghosty hypothesis, the civilization researcher asked, brows raised. Nick looked between them, surprised. They knew about ghosty. It's the best explanation we've got, the Specter researcher said. Fine, the other replied. Fusion is extremely dangerous. One wrong input and the fireball can essentially explode, turning everyone nearby to dust. The Specter researcher studied the ruin, then looked at the justiciar. I have a theory. The old man only nodded, not turning. The fireball probably caused some suffering before it detonated. At some point it transformed into a specter, which changed its properties and boosted its power. And when that happened, it broke free of containment and killed everyone in the ruin. all of it fast enough that it gained suffering even as it finished transforming. Given its power now, it likely killed over 50 people and caused immense suffering to thousands more, probably killed all the researchers here. And once its energy could no longer be harvested, several nearby settlements went without power for a long time. That covers every criterion. The justiciar just looked at the ruin. So, a possession specter possessing a big explosion. Yes, both protectors agreed. Can I use Excrep's detachment without killing it? Only if there's a way to keep feeding it, whatever it needs to keep exploding. The Specter researcher turned to the other, not remotely worth the effort. Nick listened as the justiciar worked through increasingly elaborate extraction methods, each one shot down in turn. Zephyx suppressors, he tried. That would kill it, the Specter researcher said flatly. Silence. Carrying the whole building out is too risky, the justiciar finally said. If we're attacked on the way back and this thing gets loose, he paused. Seems there's no other way. The protectors looked at him with concern but didn't argue. It really was the only option. Nick had no idea what they meant, but kept watching. Bring the liaison back to the city and give them an appropriate reward, the justiciar told the scout and the civilization researcher. Affirmative, they said, flying him out of the hole and setting him down on the surface, then gesturing him toward the city. What's the justiciar doing? Nick asked as they ran. They didn't answer right away. Near the city's edge, they stopped. The justiciar is the best suppressor in the world, one said seriously. He has an ability that can suppress any specter, even when technology and knowledge fail. But it comes at a heavy price. Every use ages his body several years. He doesn't have many left. Nick felt the mood turn solemn and didn't press for details. That they'd told him this much already felt remarkable. Thanks for telling me, he said. What do you want as your reward? One asked. You're the liaison, you can decide for Crimson City, right? Nick nodded, I can. Know what you want. He did. He and Arya had already talked it over. Can you capture the plague vulture and give it to Crimson City? The big bird west of here. Nick nodded. Does the city already have a demon? Kugelblitz has one, the city itself doesn't. How powerful is the governor? Early hero, mid-hero within 3 years. The two protectors traded a look. Do you have a containment unit big enough to hold it? No. The plague vulture was nearly 50 meters long. They'd need one at least 75 meters, and strong enough to hold an aggressive demon. How long to build one? Nick did the math. About 5 days. Do you have 3 tons of Zephyx in liquid funds? One asked, brows raised. Nick nodded and both their eyebrows went up further. You do. Yes. The question had been mostly a courtesy. He hadn't expected the city to actually have 3 tons of Zephyx sitting around. The two exchanged a look and nodded. All right, one said, turning back to Nick. We'll contain it as your reward, a special Zephyx-powered suppressor. 3 tons should keep the plague vulture suppressed for about 9 days, enough time to finish its containment unit. Nick sighed in relief. The plague vulture had been a massive thorn in the city side, tying up specialists and sealing off the entire west. With it finally handled, the city could spread its wings, metaphorically anyway. Where do you want it? For now, drop it in the crater south of the city. They glanced south and nodded. Sure, give us about 2 hours to plan and another hour to carry it out. You'll have your rotting bird by the end of the day.